a song for you.
You're listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I will do one episode for each song the band recorded in the studio. However, this is a fan podcast and not band endorsed. It's more of a tribute to their long history, well beyond just the hits, and my way of giving something back to a band that has given so much to me. Let's dig in! Hello and welcome to episode number 54 of Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, but as you guys may have noticed from the title of this episode, while we're talking about no one came, someone came to the show, and it is the podcasting king himself, one Mr. Kevin Brown. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing very, very well, and I'm very excited to talk about Deep Purple, Scott, and ask lots of questions about Deep Purple.
I am excited to have you on. You and I have been on a great number of podcasts together. You, of course, had me as a guest on your Tom Petty Project podcast. And even though I'm not a fan of Tom Petty, I had such a great time hanging out with you on that show.
Well, that's similarly, I mean, what I respect about you too a lot is that you're not always looking for someone to just echo chamber back to you your own views. It's nice to have someone in the podcast sphere who will say, okay, I don't love this, but maybe if I get someone on to explain to me why they love it, maybe I'll sort of find an angle into it, or maybe I won't. But just having that difference of opinion and being able to sort of navigate it respectfully, I think is really important, and you're a master at it.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think the thing is that music is such a subjective thing. And if there's something that I hear and I don't like, maybe it wasn't the right time for me to hear a new song. Maybe it wasn't time for me to be exposed to another band. And if it had been on a different day, I might have liked them. So if I'm missing out on something, tell me. I'm always happy to give something a second chance. I think too easily we're quick to judge and say, well, I don't like that. We put it in that compartment, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. I do struggle sometimes with, you're really missing out on this, because I don't know about you, but sometimes, you've got to listen to these guys. You're really missing out. It's like, am I? I mean, I've got so much stuff that I love. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, we were talking about that a little bit earlier, like the idea of just going to your comfort food. Like if you go to a restaurant and you're going to spend an hour in a restaurant and you're going to spend $50 on dinner, are you going to want to take a chance on a meal that you've not tried before? Or are you going to want to go with something that you know you're going to like?
Yeah, if I'm spending money on it, pretty much, I'm one of those horrible people who certain restaurants, I'm getting that. There's one restaurant in town, it's a like a Tex-Mex type of place called Amigos, and that's pretty much the only place where I'll try and order something different, because I know that everything's good there, and I know that generally I like everything, so that's my one place where I get adventurous. Everywhere else, I've got additionally stick to it.
Well, I think there's a way, like you kind of build rapport with a menu, like you would a music catalog,
of course, yeah.
And at some point you're going to want to try everything if everything else is that good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another podcast that you do is the Seaside Pod Review, which is a Queen podcast that you do with your buddy Randy. Man, you know, again, it's so interesting because you do shows with bands that I just never really got into. And kind of like listening to Corey doing And the Podcast Will Rock, whereas I'm very much not a Van Halen fan. I enjoy listening to the show because I love the banter that you have with Randy. I love your passion for Queen. Even if I don't like the songs, the show is really enjoyable to me.
Well, that's funny because I learned that from Corey. I mean, our mutual friend Corey Morissette. Like when listening to And the Podcast Will Rock, that's when the penny, because I didn't listen to a ton of music podcasts at that point, but really listen to Corey and Mark, that's when the penny dropped. Oh, you can make this entertainment as well as sort of music criticism, music appreciation. You can also make this, you can have bits and you can have little format points and you can do this and you can do that. And it's like, okay, that's cool. That format will work beautifully with me and Randy to do a band that, let's pick Queen. Queen will do, because I love Queen. Randy doesn't know them, so there's going to be a ton of stuff that's going to be first-time listens. I'll get to see my friend hear It's Late or Get Down, Make Love or Sleeping on the Sidewalk for the first time, and that's really exciting, right?
Yeah, and to share that love with somebody who also loves the same band or the same music, even though not necessarily in the same way or the same songs, that's really something special, and I really enjoy both of those shows. The other show that I enjoy, although it is sometimes painful, is the show that you do with our mutual friend Corey Morissette, and I'm honored to do your season wraps with you as the Ultimate Catalog Clash. I love the approach that you guys take to this show because it's really different, I think, from all the other music review podcasts.
Yeah, that one was, I mean, Corey pitched that to me. We were actually talking about and the podcast will rock, we were talking about Genesis and Phil Collins era Genesis specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And Corey said, like, that would be a really good podcast to do at some point. I said, dude, I'd be up for that. So then he talked to me, he said, well, I've had this idea for, I think it was a movie show where he'd rank movies based on like production, casting, sort of 3 or 4 or 5 criteria. Mm-hmm. He said, well, what about if we do a show where we use lyrics, music, and production, and we rank those, sort of a weighted ranking. The way we do it is 10 for music, 10 for lyrics, 5 for production, and we come up with a score out of 25 each for a side of a record, which means that eventually both sides will end up with 100. And it ends up being a lot more, or as close to objective as you can get, really. All that subjectivity is still going to come in, but having that objective lens through it really makes you... It's uncomfortable sometimes because, I mean, we talked about this. I'm a huge Genesis fan, and I know that you're a big Genesis fan too. Mm-hmm. The fact that Duke only came in at around, I think it was like a 70% or something.
Yeah.
That's a 95% album for me, front to back. I love that album. And yet, when you sit down and examine each individual song and just to, review it without that context, it really sort of exposes, yeah, you could tighten that up as a song, or you could do this, or you could do that. Oh, the lyrics aren't great, or the production here is a bit muddy or out of balance, whatever. So I like the fact that, I've got my Tom Petty podcast where it's just me, and same with you going through this podcast when you do your songs, it's just your opinions and you get time to think about it and sort of, and I actually write a script for mine for the Petty. With Queen, it's definitely that sort of really entertainment, and it's first time listening, we don't know what song we're going to listen to, so you can't do any prep for it. Then the ultimate catalog clash is that the other third part of that is we can get really forensic about, okay, Corey, I want you to stop it here, play from here, and listen to the bass, how the bass is syncopating off the drums, or it's playing a counter melody, whatever it might be. So having those 3 different ways of talking about music really gives me that sort of full spectrum to be a nerd in 3 different ways. So.
Well, absolutely, and when you're doing it by yourself, it's definitely different than when you're running a podcast. Like right now, so I'm in charge of the technical side of things, and so I'm responsible for playing and all that. So it's like I have a lot of other things to focus on besides just the music. So when I do one with a guest, I don't personally dig in as deep into music as I do when I'm doing it by myself, because I have to handle all those other things. So it's interesting, too, that I found this with Uriah Heep, the Magician's podcast, is that it is different. And with that, when I went back in a final season, or while I was waiting for the new album to come out, and actually did a season of all the songs that I had guests on, I did an episode by myself where I could go back in and then do my own sort of critical review of it.
Right.
But what you're doing is you guys are putting on the producer hat. You're saying, what would I have done as a producer? I would have changed this in the production. I would have said, no, you need to change this verse because it's just stupid. Or, I would have put another verse in here or rearranged the song. It's a different perspective. But then we all kind of realized at one point, a couple seasons in, that, okay, but I think you're missing something. I said, I think you're missing the fact that you're looking at the production, but you guys keep saying, I can't believe it ranked this way because for me, this is a much better song. And then you came up with the Haskins scale.
Yeah. So that's our score out of 10 for the album. Or we were doing it by song initially, but we thought, okay, well, I think doing it as the album actually, that's better because it's an album review podcast. And actually, again, take Duke as the example, right? I mean, those songs out of context, and if you played, I don't know, Duke's End, came up on a playlist, it would be weird. Mm-hmm. Because you need Duke's Travels before it. You kind of have to have that sequence. So having the Haskins scale to say, okay, well, for all that said, I mean, I think the production isn't great on this album, or the lyrics here are a little bit dodgy there, or they're incoherent, or whatever it is. But I don't care about any of that because it's a 10. Right, and I think that having that Haskins scale in place now, and we had to call it the Haskins scale because it was your suggestion.
I appreciate that.
But it was really liberating, right? I mean, and it sort of, this season we were talking about offline. We're covering albums from 1983 this season, and it's been a tough slog sometimes for both me and Corey. Like Corey just couldn't get on board with the Eurythmics, and I scored that album quite low, even though I love it, which is the prime example of it. But when you look at the songs, 5-minute dirge got like 2 sections and they repeat for a minute off and on. Mm-hmm. I could see how, unless you like that type of thing, it's just not going to land with you, right? So
right, and I think so much of the 80s was like that too, especially with like the synth pop stuff and the British New Wave invasion, because so much of it was programmed. It was easy to just say, I'm going to create a verse, I'm going to create a chorus, and then I'll just copy and paste them into position, and I'll play like a lead over them or something, or I'll do a counter melody live. And I think that's why we get a lot of that sort of static block music.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the same thing Corey said to me about Quiet Riot and Def Leppard, where that was really, those albums were paradigm shifting in a sense, and Motley Crue to a bit of a lesser extent, but they were doing something that really was fairly new in that space. And I think that the Eurythmics kind of got caught. Sweet Dreams kind of gets caught in that net as well, where because it was one of the first records like that, there were just people came along who did that thing, including the Eurythmics later. They just did that thing better.
Right.
There were just albums. It's like, I mean, if you look at Pyromania, if you look at those albums that we covered in 1980, I would argue that Slippery When Wet and New Jersey, they take all those elements of what hair metal is, if you want to call it that, or glam metal or whatever it is, and they perfected it. I mean, Bon Jovi just tied everything up in Nightclub Board. This is how you do it. This is the optimal way to write these huge melodic choruses and these big hooks, and you've got this, so they kind of took all those elements of what everyone else had been doing and they perfected it. And I would say in the same vein, bands like the Pet Shop Boys, they took what OMD and Eurythmics and all those bands have been doing and said, okay, well, this is how we can make this completely commercial and we'll sell millions of records. We're not doing anything different, really. We're just kind of rounding the edges off a little bit and taking some of the less commercial sounding stuff and dumbing it down a wee bit.
Well, and I think that's why if you go to, say, YouTube or TikTok and you see these really young kids and they're playing like phenomenal, and you'd be like, I hate you because you're so good at 8 years old or 9 years old. But I think they're doing exactly that. They've got so much to draw from, so much accessible to them. It's more accessible to play instruments. Instruments are being made now to be easier to play. And then you've got all this stuff to be inspired from, tools to learn it. I mean, they're really growing up now with a huge advantage. And I think that's what groups like Bon Jovi had. They had so much to look at and go, what's working, what's not working, what can we fuse together to create something new, but kind of like an ultimate of all these things that people love.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I don't know how you find the time to do all these podcasts. And on top of it, and I don't know if it'll be out by the time this airs, but it should be pretty close, will be the new show Rock Court, where Corey is kind of the almost bystander judge, just kind of ruling over the kingdom of whatever the trial is going to be. And you are one of the attorneys on the first season. Without giving too much away, because I don't know if it's out yet, can you kind of give us like a brief overview?
Yeah, definitely. I can give you the high level stuff. I mean, so the first case is Sammy Hagar versus David Lee Roth, who is the better lyricist, because of course the Hagar versus Roth argument continues to this day in the Van Halen fan sphere that, Dave's the better performer, Sammy's the better vocalist, Dave's cooler, Sammy's lame, Dave was at the forefront and Sammy was just a rock guy or a radio guy, all those kinds of things. But we sort of took that out and said, okay, well, let's not worry about the frontman stuff. Let's not worry about the the chart success. Let's talk about who's the better lyricist. And, they both, Hagar and Roth both have solo careers as well as the stuff they did in Van Halen. Mm-hmm. Let's look at that and let's try and argue it like in a courtroom where we have articles of evidence, we have witnesses, we have a jury, we have a 5-man jury, and it is 5 men, unfortunately. We couldn't get any women in there. But a 5-man jury, and we have an impartial judge who we can object and we can, all the sort of rules of court apply. It's a lot of fun. And I'm wrapping up my case in the next week. We were going to do it this weekend, but Councillor Heath McCoy is the other rock attorney. He couldn't make this weekend. So we're hoping to wrap up soon. So I'm thinking that show might be out somewhere in the end of April, which will be a lot of fun.
That is good to know because this will air, let me double check here. This will air April 28th. So probably right around that time. So look out for Rock Court, you guys. I find the interesting thing about that would be because certain bands, and there are a core audience of Deep Purple fans who I think are this way, where they're like, if Richie Blackmore's not in the band, it's not Deep Purple. I think with Van Halen, they're one of the most polarizing bands as far as their fans go. People feel like they had to take sides and say, I hate Sammy Hagar, David Lee Roth is Van Halen, or vice versa. Like, yeah, he wasn't that good. Hagar saved Van Halen and he's the guy, and they go with that. And it seems like there aren't as many people that are just like, you know what, I just like Van Halen.
Well, that's to me, it's about Ed and Al. I mean, it's about the guitar and it's about the drums. I mean, the other stuff, it's good that you've got good vocalists and good lyricists. And I think that Van Halen, both ears, was good in different ways. Mm-hmm. But I'm listening, I mean, with that band, the itch that they scratch is virtuoso guitar playing and two brothers who were just in complete lockstep on every single note they ever played, and that comes across. But you're talking about Deep Purple, that and the first question I was going to ask you is I don't think that schism is quite as big, but is there like a group of fans who said Mark II, that's Deep Purple? Because we talked about this a little bit offline. That's my entry point, and that's still, when I think of when Deep Purple plays in my head, it's Mark II Deep Purple is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that is the core audience, seems to be, either Mark II, or the ones that will accept the fact that the band did evolve a little bit, will always say, well, Mark II was the best lineup. And I'm like, okay, but there's so many factors. Like, what are you basing that on? Do you honestly believe that the songs that Mark II wrote are the best songs the band ever wrote? Or is it just that this is the Deep Purple I grew up with, so this is my core listening experience? So those are the songs that mean the most to me? Because honestly, I probably would have said, as much as I've enjoyed like each new album that's come out, until they attached to Bob Ezrin, I probably would have said, yeah, I think, Fireball's still my favorite. I love Who Do We Think We Are? And, Deep Purple, the third album. But, the albums that they've done since they've attached to Bob Ezrin have been fantastic. Like Infinite is one of my favorite albums. The new Equals One is an amazing album. I loved Whoosh. Okay. So to me, it's just, I have to separate the nostalgia factor and go,
of course,
do I want to listen to this album more than that album? That's the only way I can really judge, to me, what I guess I enjoy more than another. But to me, the point is I just have all of it available to enjoy. Yeah. And I don't really care what market was that did it.
Well, it's a stupid thing to limit yourself, right? It always is, for sure. But one thing I'd say with this era of heavy metal, or I don't know, do we call Deep Purple heavy metal? I mean, they're part of one of the big three, right? Sabbath, Zeppelin, Deep Purple, in my mind, were always kind of the three founding fathers. Mountain really weren't that big in the UK, so they're kind of on the periphery of it, although they're talked about in the same light now. But to me, one of the things that I find is that type of music, quote unquote, generally, I want it to sound like it did in the early 70s. And when it's got a more modern production aesthetic, I find that it doesn't resonate with me in quite the same way. Which is not to say it's not as good. It just doesn't resonate with me in that same way, where I want it to sound a little bit dirty. I want it to sound just a little bit dangerous and raw. And because that's what was one of the things that was charming about it. And that's what I kind of carried forward into adulthood, was that sense of, the hell is this? No one's playing like anything like this on the radio. What am I listening to here?
Right. Well, I think
listen to Burn the first time. The first time I put that album on, it's the same thing. I've talked about this lots on other podcasts about Black Dog by Zeppelin. That was I remember. I've got that sense memory of putting that record on, dropping the needle on Zep 4, and just being like, "What the." This is my music. This is what I want to listen to.
Yeah.
And the same thing the first time I heard Burn, I'm like, what is this? This is amazing, So,
but I think Burn's an interesting one, because as many people are diehard Mark II fans, there's so many people that love Burn and will say this is one of the greatest rock albums of all time. And I hate when people use those terms, because it's such. I mean, God, there's millions of rock albums out there to pinpoint that. But it's really more what they're saying, if you really think about it, is they're talking about their connection to the music. There's something about this that just is amazing. And I think part of it is the rich, full sound of the entire album. I mean, you just feel immersed when you listen to it. And then you go to Stormbringer, and Stormbringer is very bluesy, very thin sounding album, and has a completely different sonic experience.
Yeah.
But yet you have the exact same band.
And the same producers, right? Because Deep Purple were their own producers, right? So it's interesting that, I mean, that can be changing equipment. It could be changing engineers and mix engineers. That's a big thing. We're thinking about that lots too, about like even, my Petty podcast, where we talk about the producer lots, because a producer does make a big difference. We talk about the songs have to be strong. We talk about the musicians have to know how to play, and they have to be competent at everything else.
Yeah.
But a good mix engineer or a bad mix engineer can make or completely break your album.
Well,
right? If you've not got a good mix engineer, no matter how good you are on the shoot, if they can't get that performance out and replicate it to acetate, well, then it's all for nothing.
Well, and I think Martin Birch was the engineer for all of those albums. But what you have is you have Glenn and David joining the band for Burn. And so, the newbies are going to try and insert themselves, but they're also going to be a little standoffish and coming off of an album that had a lot of issues internally in the band. And then, you're like, okay, so we've separated the two groups in the band. Now we've got fresh blood. Let's just attack this thing. And they wrote the kind of music that they wrote. But now you get to the second album, and now the newbies aren't newbies anymore. And now they're going to start inserting their feelings and their writing and start pushing for their space in the band and making it a 5-piece again instead of, okay, there's the core and the newbies. So it really does change. And Glenn Hughes being a very soulful, bluesy guy, obviously he had a huge impact on that album. And that's where Richie said, okay, I don't really want to do this. I'm going to go off. But he actually had tried to separate from Deep Purple earlier anyway. He tried to take Ian Pace and start a band with Phil Lynott, and that didn't work out. And then he wanted to pull away to do, side projects and stuff. So part of that was because the band didn't want to do covers, and he really wanted to do Black Sheep of the Family because he loved the song. So, I mean, you start seeing that split, and it's like it was just such a good opportunity for him to go, you know what, here's a good out for me. I don't like where the band is headed. Instead of taking charge and saying, all right, guys, we did this album, it's too bluesy, we need to get back to rock and roll, which he could have done, and the band still being hugely successful, I think it was kind of a gutsy move to go, I'm just going to go start my own thing. Now, whether that was because he thought, okay, I have enough of a presence, I think I'm well enough known to go off on my own and be successful and bring a fan base with me, which could be, or I just hate this so much that I still want to be a musician, but I don't want to do that anymore and just be done with it.
There's also the Blackmore factor, right? I mean, Richie Blackmore's just Richie Blackmore, and which is why. I mean, you said it right off the top, right? If there's no Richie, then it's not Deep Purple, and I know that that's nonsense because obviously you've still got a lot of you've got Ian Pace and you've got Gillan, and you've got these guys who were also foundational and they had to be in that band. Right. But to me, that's when you lose that Blackmore X factor. It's like, man, he was such a pioneer, such an interesting, weird, lunatic kind of space cadet that, of course you're going to get genius from that, and of course you're also going to get conflict. Right. But I think the conflict sometimes you make good music when you get a bit of conflict. If no one's feeling particularly safe, sometimes it's a good thing. But
what's interesting to me is that, Richie said he wanted to get back to hard rock, but then you listen to Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, and it's really kind of a mellow sounding album to me. It was the live version that brought things like Man on the Silver Mountain to life, because the album version is very slow and mellow and really well paced, but not exciting or dramatic. It's just a nice listen. But then you get to the live version on stage and you're like, holy shit, like this is a heavy song. Yeah.
Well, I was listening to talking about that exact thing, Ring That Neck, right? That song you were talking about, I was listening to your episode on that one because I've always loved that one too. Yeah. And there's a video, excuse me, sorry. There's a video of them playing it in 1970 on YouTube, which I'm sure you've seen. And it's just electric. Like, it's just, you're watching John Lord and Richie Blackmore just trying to one-up each other. Ian Pace, by the way, who's just one of the best rock drummers not just rock drummer, one of the best drummers who's ever picked up sticks in the back. And you've got, Glover's on bass. And it's just like this thing where, are you serious? This is like, you've got these 4 people in the same band? Yeah. Are you out of your mind? This is crazy,
Well, and that's the thing, is that they're a band that you can listen to on record, and they were a good studio band, but they didn't like the studio because it was kind of like when they went and recorded Made in Japan and they were told, hey, we're going to be recording this. So it's like, we're being watched. And Roger said, the first night we were out there like 4 puppets because we were afraid of making mistakes because we were being recorded. So there's that pressure in the studio. And it wasn't until later on in more recent years where they've actually gone and started enjoying the studio experience because it's become fun. But it's like, you're under that pressure. But when you get to what they're like on stage back then, it was pandemonium. John Lord said it was just dangerous being on a Deep Purple stage because it was unexpected. It was a lot of improv. It was a lot of one-upsmanship, and it was exciting.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly the word, though, right? And that's where I think that Richie is kind of one of those guys. He's a bit like Freddie Mercury. He's a bit like Mark Bolan, where he's got so much presence that it's not just the music. And of course, he is an absolute genius with the guitar. And Freddie was a genius vocally. And, all those things have to be in place as well. But it's when someone just mesmerizes you when you watch them, just by the way you watch Blackmore play, he's completely lost in it. Nothing else exists in that moment for him. And it's all he cares about. Right. And he doesn't play everything the same way twice. He doesn't, he knows where the one is and he knows how to get back to the lick. But he might go off for 2 or 3 minutes and I don't know, just the guys, he'll tell the guys, he'll give him a nod when he's going to come back in. But up to that point, it's just, okay, well, we just got to support him now. And the same thing when John Law goes off one of his flights of fancy, well, we'll keep everything together. We'll just wait till he's done, and then we'll come back in. And that to me is always the sign of, that's a band. That's a real band.
Right.
You know, it's not just four musicians playing together. That's a band.
Yeah, and you can watch pretty much any Deep Purple or Rainbow live video, and you'll notice that he will cue the band. He'll turn around, he'll wave his hand and say, "Hey, it's about time. We're gonna." Yeah. And they have those planned points where they kind of meet up again, like whether it's the end of Mandrake Root, which was like typically that da 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 da, that they'll end the song with. That was very common. Even if they were doing Space Trucking, they would end on that Mandrake Root part, because they had those planned parts where they would come together, but everything in between is just pandemonium. And that's a band where I couldn't make the argument to listen to their live stuff, because every event is going to be different. Whereas a lot of bands, they go out and they play the song, and that's fine. But do I want to go pay $40-$50 to go see a band that's going to play the album, or do I want to see a band that's going to put on a concert?
I want a show, man. I don't want to. We talked about this lots. I mean, you know, people say, "Oh, Nickelback, man, you go see them live, and it's exactly like listening to the CD." Well, then I'll save $80 and a bunch of hassle. I'll just listen to the CD then. Right. Like, why would I go and pay to? I want to see a show. I want you to entertain me. I prefer it like if you did one song a little bit different, or if you throw in an extended jam section. Yeah. You know, if you go see Deep Purple and they're going to play the Mule, I want to hear a drum solo in the middle of that song. There's got to be a drum solo in there. Right?
Yeah. So, I think they're a little less improvisational now. I think they stick a little bit more to the song, but it's still an exciting. In fact, when I saw them in August, I could not believe how great they sounded. I mean, you're talking about guys that are in their mid-70s that have spent their lives touring and not just living cushy lives. Yeah. And I mean, they sounded amazing. And but I think too, one of the things that ruined it for me very early on was a show called Solid Gold. I don't know if you got this growing up, but basically it was like a Top of the Pops type show. You would have bands on playing their hits, but they were mimicking playing to the record, and it was very obvious. I mean, sometimes the guitars weren't even plugged in, and we didn't have wireless systems yet. And I think, like, why would you do that?
That's exactly what Top of the Pops was, right? And you know, there are famous instances. I don't know if the same thing on that show where I think Oasis, they had the bass player on vocals, miming the vocals. Noel Gallagher was playing the drums. Liam was playing guitar. So they just all switched because they're like, we want to show people this is stupid. Right. That we're just miming and this is absolutely pointless. Which I get them, and Queen hated it, you know, because the cymbals are wooden, so that they don't ring out, they don't make a big noise, and it doesn't bleed in. Yeah. But they just want to show the kids dancing, and they want to play the songs as you know. I mean, it's just, it's so stupid. I mean, okay, with whoever the pop sensation of the day is, who maybe isn't that great a performer, you can see that you don't want to take the risk. But Deep Purple, you're going to make them mime? Are you out of your mind?
Right. Yeah, exactly. There was one, was it the Mamas and the Papas, I think, or ABBA? I can't remember now, where one of the girls was just eating a banana. Because she's like, I'm not going to do this. I will stand out here with my band, but I am not going to partake in this. So she just stood there and ate a banana. I'm like,
brilliant.
That's brilliant. I love it. And who was the other one? Was it Iggy Pop, I think, was one of the people that just like refused to be a part of it. And he just would not sync to the record. And I'm like, it just goes to prove like this is a bad idea. Just, you've got the equipment there, just turn it on and get a mixer. And, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it would be so much better a show too, because you'd have that performance of that song that you could, you know, I mean, now in YouTube age, you could get online and people would watch it because, you know, I mean, how many times have people watched that performance of While My Guitar Gently Weeps with Petty and Jeff Lynne and Prince playing that solo? Mm-hmm. Well, if you just got up and you got them all to mime to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, you could do that, I suppose. But then you've not got that sort of that performative element of, well, we've got now potentially a definitive version of this song. Right. Which exists, you know, Rock Blast in Germany. There's all those TV shows across the ages where they do have them playing live. SNL. Mm-hmm. There are great live versions of songs on SNL that I think that's a better version of the original. Beastie Boys playing Sabotage on SNL is one of the best live performances I've ever seen. Right. But if they were just miming, well, you'd lose that then.
Yeah, and I think you know, then that's kind of been a revealer too. Who was it? Was it Jessica Simpson's sister? Ashley Simpson, yeah, the famous Ashley Simpson clip where she obviously was not going to be singing on that show. Like, you really take a risk with doing stuff like that too, especially if you're
course.
giving the illusion of playing live and you're really not.
Or if it was at Milli Vanilli when their amps, so the tape backups went and they couldn't and they had to sing. It's like, ooh, this is not going to end well.
There was a Phil Collins story too. I don't remember which song it was, but it was back in the days when they would be triggering backups. The drummer would hit like an electronic thing and trigger a backup. And I think he missed where he was supposed to trigger it, and the backups came in at the wrong time. And it's like, I mean, at least with that though, they were playing live. They didn't want to, or maybe couldn't bring backup singers for whatever reason, or maybe they didn't have them that night, and so they had them on sample. And like, I don't mind that because that's not really cheating the performance. I don't feel as much as just triggering stuff that you should be playing live. Like we're getting a lot of that now. I don't know. It's such a weird time in music. Like I don't begrudge people going out and playing because that's your livelihood and that's what you do.
Of course.
But if the presentation isn't there, it's really hard for me to stand behind it. I don't have the right to tell you not to do it, but I could say this isn't something I want to see.
Yeah, you have the right to say I'm not paying to see it. Absolutely. I mean, and that's the other side of that. If it's all presentation and there's no substance, and I think that's where I think Def Leppard are doing that now a little bit. Kiss sort of doing if it's all tracks, and I know that none of you are actually playing, or you are playing, but that's not what's getting routed out through front. Like, I'm just not as interested in that. Like you said, any musician who can make money making music, I'm 100% behind because it's difficult to do and it's getting harder every year.
Right.
But I just, I mean, especially there's someone was saying that Tommy Lee, the Motley Crue's playing to tracks. What? Why did he play those songs to tracks? They're all straight backbeat, more or less,
right?
With some good fills, and Tommy Lee's quite a good drummer. But there's nothing like it's not like he's trying to play 2112 or Burn. There's nothing in there that's going to break his wrists at his age, So.
Right, and well, at least we know Vince Neil's not singing to tracks because he's just mumbling phrases now. I mean, it's that. See, and that's a perfect. And I was never a fan of Motley Crue anyway, and I don't mean to pick on them, but that's an example of something I would not want to pay to see. If I had been a fan of theirs. And they came to my town, I would not want to go see that because that is not, it's not a good performance. It's, I think, more of a nostalgia or being able to say, I saw Motley Crue, but they're not in a heyday point. Whereas I feel like going and seeing Deep Purple, they're still putting on a damn good show. Yeah. I walked out of both of those shows going, oh my God, I want to join a band. And if I can get somebody that makes me want to do that, that's a band I would pay to see.
Yeah, I saw them in 2012 here, and they've only played Saskatoon, my hometown, once, and I thankfully got tickets to go see them. I just wanted to tell you the set list here because it's pretty good, man.
Okay, so 2002,
2012
or 12,
2012.
That would have been wrapped. What tour was that?
Smoke on the Nation. So I think it's like probably a greatest hit C type of tour potentially.
Okay,
I'm not too sure. But it was Don Airey on keys, obviously. Gillan singing. Weird too. I don't know if he still does, but Gillan, after every song, he walked off stage. I don't know if he was getting water. It was I think it was when he had his foot was in a boot. Like I think he'd broken his ankle or his foot, or it was something when he was in that boot thing. But I mean, so the set list: open with Highway Star, Hard Loving Man, Maybe I'm a Leo, Strange Kind of Woman, Rapture of the Deep, Woman from Tokyo, Contact Lost, guitar solo, the well-dressed guitar, When a Blind Man Cries, The Mule with the drum solo, Lazy, No One Came, so I saw No One Came live.
Excellent. Keyboard
solo, Perfect Strangers, Space Trucking, Smoke in the Waters to close, and then the encore was Hush, bass solo, Black Knight.
Black Knight, yeah. Okay, so that probably would have been the Rapture of the Deep tour if they were doing that track. That was a great time to see them, and their live version of No One Came is phenomenal.
Oh, dude, I lost my mind.
Yeah.
And I was one of the only people in the place who lost their mind.
But, if you think about it, you take Highway Star, you take Hard Lovin' Man, which is a really tough track to play because it's just so dramatic and exciting and just has so much in it. For guys even at that age to say, we're going to do this on stage and feel confident to walk out there and do it, that says a lot about how they felt about themselves as musicians. Because that's not a song that you would be tackling if you weren't confident.
Yeah, you don't take it lightly, right? But I mean, like you said, I think that at that stage, you've got a bunch of professionals who they know where the limits are and they know if they can take that on, and that might change night to night too, right? It might be, I don't think we can do it tonight. I'm not feeling quite.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to quite nail this, so we'll just bring something else in, and I'm sure that happened, right? So
Yeah, and I mean, an opening with Highway Star, which I mean, vocally is a very aggressive song. But thinking about like how that plays out, you just get that ticking on the snare, just really gentle, and it's like, okay, all right, rocket's taking off. It's such a great opener.
Well, I mean, you look at those, the big three for me. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit. Like In Rock, Fireball, Machine Head. I was telling you today, just through messages, that I would stack that 3-album run up against anything in the hard rock, heavy metal canon, because every song off those 3 albums I love. And you look at the openers on those, you got Speed King opens In Rock, Fireball opens that album, and Highway Star opens Machine Head. That's a statement, eh? That is a statement.
Absolutely. And that was actually one of the things that Ian Gillan became unhappy with at one point, is he says, we've become kind of formulaic the way that we've done our albums. You have to have this blistering opener. And I think when they got to, was it Now What? I think when they did a Simple Song, it actually just starts like very quiet and elegant. You think it might even be a ballad before it kicks in. So he's like, I think they did like a conscious, we've got to do something different. We just can't do the same thing over and over. And I really appreciate that, because a band, of course, you kind of want to come out on fire. That's kind of the perception. If you're going to do a hard rock album, you want to define it right off the bat.
Well, I mean, is there any better album opener than Burn in that vein?
Yeah, exactly. Or look at Led Zeppelin. You've got Immigrant Song opening up Led Zeppelin 3. And I mean, that's another killer opening song, But then you look at Stormbringer, and Stormbringer's kind of a heavy song, but it's like that whole album is just a little bit more mellow. And that's probably about the heaviest song on that album. So it made sense for that to be the opener, but it's not the blistering, explosive opener like Burn or Machine, Highway Star or anything like that. But interesting, the one album that you didn't mention from Mark IV, because you told me that you didn't have it growing up, was Who Do We Think We Are?
Yeah.
And that is an album that has been kind of separated because people have said, well, it's not as good as the others. Personally, I love it start to finish, but it does have a different sound. Opening with Woman from Tokyo is not the blistering heavy opener that you get in the other albums because of the tempo of it. It is a heavy song, but it's got a lot more gentleness to it than the others. And it's interesting that it has been separated quite a bit. And I wonder if that's why you guys didn't have it growing up.
Maybe. I mean, I think a lot of it was just what my mum and dad bought, right? I mean, that's what it tends to come down to when you're a kid. But you think about it, like Woman from Tokyo that's probably as close as Deep Purple came to pop, I would say, in terms of like having a song that you can definitely, I mean, when that was a radio hit in England, I mean, I knew that song for sure, but we didn't have that album. So, and I do think that, I don't know, because we definitely had Burn, or we definitely had Stormbringer, and I'm 90% sure we had Burn. Mm-hmm. So for that one to be omitted, that is slightly odd that one was singled out in our house. I should ask my dad about that and find out why we didn't have it. But
yeah, I mean, it could have just been it just passed us by. It could be
that
very
too,
simple.
yeah.
But it's just interesting that would be the one that did that. I got into Deep Purple a couple of years before they reformed for Perfect Strangers. So I was still working on collecting their back catalog when they reformed.
Oh wow!
And I was so excited. I found them through Rainbow because Rainbow did on the Straight Between the Eyes tour as an encore. They did Smoke on the Water, and I had never heard the song, didn't know what it was. I mean, I might have heard it, but like on the radio in the background, but didn't know the song at all. And so found out what it was, found out about Deep Purple, started greedily eating up their back catalog as quickly as I could. And then, of course, I was so excited when they were reforming. So that was my entry point into Purple. But you... What age were you, do you think, when you started getting into those older albums?
I mean, as soon as my mum and dad would let me put a record on the turntable and put the headphones on and listen myself. So I don't know what age that would have been, maybe 5?
Oh, wow. Okay.
6, probably something around there, because, we're talking now back in the old days when it was vinyl, we didn't have 8-track. We didn't have cassette yet. That wasn't even out yet. So vinyl was how we listened to music, and we didn't have access to the whole world on our phones like you kids these days.
Yeah.
So I just had what was in that box underneath the record player in my mum and dad's front room, and all the Deep Purple albums, all the Zapp albums, the Kinks, the Who, the Beatles, Queen, T-Rex. All that's what I grew up on. That was my music. And fortunately for me, it's music that I really took to, because, not everyone loves their parents' music.
Right.
I did. And my dad's a musician as well. So my dad's a guitar player. So most of the bands that we had in that cardboard box and the record player, they were guitar albums. You know, so I grew up listening to guitarists, which is why I love Blackmore, which is why I love Page, it's why I love, you know, Tony Iommi and all these, and Brian May and Ray and Dave Davis. That's why I like guitars, I think, is because I grew up listening to the guys who really kind of started a lot of this music.
Are you, do you listen to Michael Schenker at all?
No.
That might be a band that you might like too, maybe depending on the era, but it's very similar music.
Okay. Well, we talked a little about this offline. I realized not all that long ago, I'm always trying to formulate or try to, you know, not formulate, formalize my sort of ideas. And I realized that I'm not a genre listener. I don't know, you know, like I don't know Styx. I don't know Winger. I don't know Triumph. I don't know all the Prism. I know all these bands that everyone's, you don't know those guys, like, but you listen to X and Y and Z. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, but that doesn't mean I listen to only rock and I don't listen to only country and I don't listen to only folk. I like bits of everything, and certain bands tend to scratch certain itches for me.
Right.
And so I don't sort of, there's not that many, I was telling you, there's not that many bands that I would say I'm a catalogue fan of. Mm-hmm. There's probably about a dozen, 13, 14 maybe, where I can say 80 to 90% of that catalogue I know really well. I really like almost all of it, if not all of it. But those bands are few and far between for me. I'm definitely not a genre fan. So yeah, there's loads of bands that, Scorpions, never really listened to them. Dio, sadly, I know, you know, Rainbow in the Dark, obviously from, you know, the Rainbow, but I don't know a lot of Dio. There's tons of bands that are passing me by and I'll probably end up getting into. But there's also loads of other music I get into too, right? So
just based on your taste for guitar, especially because Michael Schenker is to me, I don't mean to compare him to Richie Style, because they're two different guitarists, but there's that same kind of songwriting, same kind of focus on the guitar solos, some instrumental songs that are really guitar centric. And you having grown up with that being kind of a focus, I think that might be a band that you could get into. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a lot of it is just what comes on our radar. There's so many bands for me that people like, I get that same thing because I feel like I really kind of pigeonholed my musical tastes fairly early. And people are like, oh, I can't believe you don't know this band. I'm like, yeah, I couldn't name a single song by Third Eye Blind or, you know, Blind Melon or any of these bands. You know, I'm like, I don't know a single song. Or maybe System of a Down, I might know one or two, and that's about it. Yeah. And I'm very much, I just found the things I liked very early and just kind of surrounded myself and maybe shielded myself from potential wasted time with stuff that again was like, I'm going to the restaurant, I'm spending my money, I'm going to go with something I like.
Well, let me ask you this then too, because there's a sort of an add-on to that, or sort of an extension of that is, I think that you're similar to me in that with Take Uriah Heep. I mean, you've done a podcast on their entire catalog. Mm-hmm. So you tend to get really kind of, not obsessed isn't the right word, but really in detail and really deep on bands that you really love. Mm-hmm. But what I've found is for some bands, and Deep Purple definitely falls into this, I love the music. Yeah. I don't really know anything about the band. It's one of those bands that I don't know very much about the band, but I'll tell you, dude, that fill coming out of the bridge into the chorus on that song is life. That's the best thing I've ever, you know what I mean? So that's what I nerd out about for more so than knowing, you know, you get someone like Eric Senich, who's our mutual friend from And the Podcast Will Rock, who's got this massively broad knowledge of almost all sort of hair metal, almost all hard rock, a lot of heavy, you know, and he's got this kind of encyclopedic knowledge of the genre, but isn't kind of, I don't think as, I mean, Van Halen aside, isn't like as deep as we tend to get on you know, Genesis or Queen or Uriah Heep or whoever it is. You get really specific and really listen to, I'm just listening to the hi-hat for this 8 bars. That's the only thing I'm paying attention to at this moment, you know? So. Well,
I think the difference with Eric is that he's actually more focused on the history than I mean, he knows the music of Van Halen very well, but I think he's more like, well, when they were recording this is what was going on, or this is what was happening, or this is how this decision was made, which is fascinating stuff. But for me, I really don't care that much. I mean, I know Deep Purple's history incredibly well. I knew some of Uriah Heep's history. And people would say to me, they're like, I can't believe you didn't get into this because David Byron was doing this and this was going on. I'm like, all I care about is how does this music make me feel? What am I finding in the music that I like and don't like? And that's always been the focus. And I've gotten a lot of flack for that, but that's not what my shows are about. I mean, if something is relevant or interesting, you know, I'll talk about it. I don't have a problem with it, but it's not what the focus of the show is. The focus is the music the band's created, because bands do not get together to have people talk about what's going on in the band. They get together to make music and share it with the world. And so I try to bring the focus out of the drama and back to the music.
Well, and it's where, to draw a line under that, not to complain about it too much anymore, but like your Motley Crue, Kiss, Def Leppard maybe a little bit less so, and Quiet Riot on this current season we've done of Ultimate Catalog Clash. I don't get the sense that the music is the be-all and end-all to those bands in some, which is probably unfair, and I'm sure they think they're writing the best albums ever been written. Mm-hmm. But I always get the sense that the lifestyle and the image and the sort of the look and all that kind of stuff is at least equally as important as the music, where I don't think that ever was the case with these foundational rock bands.
Right.
I don't think that Sabbath and Zepp, and I don't think they were thinking as much about, oh man, we've got to make sure we get the right design and we've got to make sure we get this. I think they were obsessed with making the best music they could make, and that's really what drove them, not the stardom and the red carpet and all that kind of stuff. But I had another question for you quickly, Scott, because I'm thinking about this too. You know, the big three of grunge, or big four of grunge, whatever, is Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam. Mm-hmm. And sort of the big three in British heavy metal was Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath. Mm-hmm. I don't get the grunge label for the same reason I don't really get how you can call those three bands or put them under the same umbrella. Because Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, and Led Zeppelin, to me, sound nothing alike. I mean, they're not even doing anything even remotely similar at all, apart from their guitars are distorted and they play fast music sometimes. That's it.
Well,
you know what I mean?
In the Fools episode, I was talking with Jerry about that Tony Iommi, he plays what he played on the record. He plans out his solos. He's not an incredibly spontaneous guitarist, whereas Richie is like, here's what I'm feeling right now. Just listen, you know. And then you've got Zeppelin, who I think, and I've said this before, that I don't feel Zeppelin overall was a hard rock band. They had so many songs that were acoustic guitar driven, so many that were just, you know, these really gentle vocals. I think their most known songs are hard rock, so they become a hard rock band. You know, they did have some songs. I mean, you know, obviously When the Levee Breaks and you know, Stairway to Heaven and Rock and Roll. I mean, they did have some, but I would say the majority, maybe 70% of their catalog is not rock and roll to me. You know, so I've always had a hard time categorizing with that. I do say that they are founders of a change in sound for music, getting away from that 60s psychedelic sound and the 60s Motown pop sound into the formation of what would become rock and roll. I think they were pivotal in that transition. Yeah. But I don't necessarily consider them a hard rock band, because when I think Led Zeppelin, I think acoustic guitar, I think strumming, I think, you know, stuff that you don't typically get on a hard rock album.
Yeah, I'd probably would still call them. I mean, I don't know how well you know the Zepp catalog. I mean, that's another band that I know inside out, upside down. Mm-hmm. Most of the B-sides, even the later, even Coda, which is kind of an offcut, shouldn't have been released as an album, all that kind of stuff, right? That's my level with Zepp. And Zepp definitely has those softer, gentler ballads, but you got John Bonham in your band, you're rocking pretty freaking hard, man. I think, like you said, though, I think what Zepp did was take that Blues Breakers thing and take the British blues kind of stuff in Peter Green and Clapton and Cream and all those bands were doing, and just turned everything up. Really turned everything up to 11 and really just made it a lot more aggressive and a lot fuller and all that kind of stuff, right? Where this is exactly what I'm getting at. That's not what Deep Purple were doing. Richie Blackmore wasn't doing what Jimmy Page was doing, and neither of them were doing what Tony Iommi was doing. Mm-hmm. You know, not even live, but just the composition of the songs. I mean, Sweet Leaf or War Pigs wouldn't fit on a Led Zeppelin or a Deep Purple album,
right? You
know, Stormbringer or Demon's Eye wouldn't fit anywhere on a Led Zeppelin or a Black Sabbath. You'd be kidding me. You can't put those on there. You know what I mean? So, and by the same token, I don't think maybe Immigrant Song, but a song like Going to California or a song like the Lemon Song, they don't fit on Deep Purple or Black Sabbath album. So the fact that they got sort of lumped in together to this same thing is always really puzzles me. It's the same thing with that term classic rock. What the hell does that mean? That's not a useful designation. That just means old.
Right, yeah. So and if you think about it, 80s music is now considered classic because of how far away we are from it. But I think maybe it's just because those were like the first three bands that started innovating new sound and changing the direction. Yeah. I think that's about the closest you could come. And a lot of people have said, well, if you added a fourth band, it would be Uriah Heep, because their first album came out at the same time in Rock did. And, so in fact, Uriah Heep and Deep Purple shared rehearsal spaces at the same Hanwell Community Center. So they were writing Very Heavy, Very Humble at the same time Deep Purple was writing in Rock in the same building. Now think about that. Like, imagine being the janitor in that building and just like being sweeping the floors, listening to what's being created and what the next generation of music is about to become. Oh my God, I would have paid you to have that job.
How was work today, honey? Oh, these young lads these days, they play too loud. They play too loud. It hurts my ears, it does.
You had mentioned music classification. So when Deep Purple was on Rockline for the Nobody's Perfect live album, and they had John Lord, Ian Pace, Ian Gillan, and Roger Glover in the studio, or everybody but Richie?
Of course.
And my question is, given the types of heavy metal and hard rock bands that are coming out these days, how do you classify yourself? Do you classify yourself as hard rock or heavy metal or country and western even?
Could you speak a little more slowly, please? Couldn't quite grab that.
Actually, I think country and western sums it up. That's what he mentioned. It's great.
No, it's if you have to have a label, we'd prefer to call it hard rock, because that's what we always called it from the time we started. So that'll do for us now.
Yeah, that'll do. Grant, thanks for the call.
But yeah, it is interesting, the way that bands look at things, their sound. I would say that heavy metal is also probably chunkier as far as riffs go. I mean, they can be melodic. Metallica's got a lot of melodic parts, but the riffs are maybe a little bit chunkier. Definitely has like a different weight, I think, to the song. And maybe that's it. Like when you listen to any Metallica riff, it just feels bigger and thicker, I think. And part of that might be like that dual guitar combo that they have. But certainly a different sound from hard rock, where you take a band like Deep Purple or Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath can sound chunky and heavy, but it doesn't have the same weight that Metallica does.
Yeah, I mean, it's all evolution too, right? I mean, you know, everything changes, and you get a lot of screamo stuff now, and Cookie Monster metal, and then you get this split into subgenres, and there's doom, and there's sludge, and there's thrash, and there's speed, and I mean, I always go back to what Lemmy said. Someone asked him, well, what is Motorhead? What are they? Doom? Are they slash? He said, we're all just ripping off Chuck Berry. And that was his answer to it. And it's like, okay, no, that's fair enough.
It's like Roger Glover said to me one time. He says, it's all rock and roll.
Yeah,
and really, when you get down to it, it all comes from the same seed. Everything is based on that original blues, and everything has developed from that.
That's the thing, though, where a lot of modern metal loses me. They lose the roll. And it's just the rock. I like the roll. And you're a drummer too, but I like a bit of swing. I like a bit of that movement in a song that's going to be, if you can play a little bit behind the beat, that's rock and roll. That's the roll part to me, Well,
I think that's part of the reason that you like Ian Pace so much, because he does play that swing feel. 99% of drummers playing Smoke on the Water today are playing it wrong, because they're just playing it straight. And it sounds straight, but it's not. If you play along to it, like you put it on your, because you have an electronic drum kit, so you probably have an insert jack, right? You could put it iPod or from your stereo or whatever into that, listen to it through the brain, play along with it. It is not a straight beat. It has just a little bit of swagger to it.
Well, that's and again, this is where if you're not a drummer, you're probably not even going to hear that, right? So it's the same thing with Back in Black. Mm-hmm. That's a straight back beat, but it's got a very specific feel to it, and if you don't play slightly behind the beat, you're not playing it right. It's not going to sound the same, and it's going to be that indefinable thing where you go, yeah, it sounds good, but it's something different about the way you're playing that. It's just, that's the drummer's face. That's their fingerprint, right? It's like a guitarist has the vibrato. It's like a vocalist has a vibrato, or they have a certain thing. A drummer has a certain swing and a certain way of playing. You got the Ringo thing. No one plays like Ringo. Mm-hmm. It's just that thing that you can't define, I think.
And I always say, if you really want to get an understanding of what swing playing is, watch Ringo. There's a black and white video of the Beatles. I don't know what it's from, but there's a black and white video of the Beatles where you can clearly see how Ringo plays the hi-hat on Love Me Do. If you watch that video and try and play along to it, you'll get what swing is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, Kevin, I could talk to you for 6 or 7 days in a row, but we do have a song to review here.
We got way off piste.
We really did. We're going to listen to No One Came. Of all the songs that you could have picked on Fireball, Kevin, why did you choose this one?
I think, okay, I mean, I've been listening to Fireball more or less all my life that I can remember listening to music, right? And so I could have picked any song pretty much off this record I was telling you. I think probably the only one I might not have gone for was Fools, because although I love that song, it's the one I love least on the album.
Okay.
It's also weirdly kind of the song that might sound closest to Sabbath in terms of sort of it's a bit slower, it's heavy as shit, it's a really heavy song, and it's got the weird bridge section. Anyways, but I mean, No One Came because I think it's everything I love about Gillan fronted Deep Purple is in this song. It's got a sense of humor. It's got a groove, a killer groove. It's got some little flashes of virtuosity, but it's this group of people coming together to just make a pretty perfect song. And as far as an album closer goes, ending on this kind of sarcastic, lighter note, just that I like that sense of, okay, we take what we do seriously, but we're not taking ourselves too seriously. We've got our tongues very firmly in our cheek. You get songs like Anyone's Daughter that's got all those great lines in about hooking up with the judge's daughter and hooking up with the farmer's daughter and all those kinds of things. I love all that kind of stuff. But this album generally, why I like it so much and why it's my favorite Deep Purple album, and I could probably make an argument I think it's probably their best, is just because of how varied it is, how eclectic it is. You get lots of different looks. You get your face melted with Fireball. You get the blues of No, No, No. You get, like I said, you get all these different looks. And then we finish with No One Came, which doesn't sound like anything else. I don't know a song that sounds like this by anyone.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, I say all the time that I'm not, I don't pay much attention to the lyrics. But Gillan, when he writes, whether he's writing with Roger or writing by himself, the lyrics, he's such a great storyteller, and his presentation, hard not to pay attention to the lyrics, but you've also got 4 musicians behind him that are just so identifiable and you want to hear what they're doing. Yeah. It's almost like there's too much to pay attention to in their songs.
But it's all balanced though. That's the nice thing, right? That's the thing with these great songwriters and these great bands is they know when to pull back and let Gillan just have the spotlight because what he's saying is great. And then they know when to, okay, well, now he's finished. Now we can amp it up. And then, Richie's never playing over top of John. John's never playing over top of Roger. They're all coming in at exactly the right time because they understand how to write songs and how to play together. And that's, again, this album, front to back, is a perfect example of that.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, on another episode of Rockline, when it was just Roger and Ian Gillan, I think it was the House of Blue Light promo, somebody called in and asked, which would you agree is your favorite album? And of course, they're not going to agree on that. Roger picked In Rock, because he says, I feel my youth on that album. And I mean, coming off of, living in the van that they were touring with, not having a lot of money, having one nice set of clothes that he and Ian shared, which not at the same time, I'm sure. But going into then a band that was established, that had a following, that had hits, and that must have been part of that nostalgia for him. And also he wrote a good chunk of In Rock. So I would imagine there's a big tie there. Ian chose Fireball. He said, cool. I think it was where we really started to find ourselves as writers, and obviously they had done a couple of world tours by that point. They had done the Concerto, they had done In Rock, they had done Hallelujah. So they had history together. Now they were growing together as musicians and as people, getting to know each other. So I could see where that was like, okay, now we did In Rock. It was a push to do exciting and dramatic. Now we're like, we get each other. We know how each other work. Now let's see what we write together. And while it's a very experimental album, just in the light of a band that did In Rock coming and doing a song like Anyone's Daughter and putting it on the next album, it says a lot. But I do feel like the songwriting is more coherent instead of just aggressive.
Well, and I think it's accomplished too, right? You get that sense with this record that, In Rock's got that, a bit of that rawness still in there. I mean, it's produced immaculately. I guess that album sounds fantastic, and so does this one. But this one, you get the sense that, this is a band that now knows how to use the studio as that extra instrument. They know exactly what they're doing. They can arrange things really, really well. There aren't really any extraneous sections on this record. There's no sort of things where you think, that's a bit of a weaker track. Maybe you could have dropped that. Was none of that. Like, it's just this tight, perfectly sort of formed bundle of songs that also cohere into this great album on top of that.
Yeah, the only criticism I've really heard, apart from, just the variety of sounds on it, because some people really didn't take to that. In fact, I remember
Really?
a story where Roger said they had expected the record would be gold when they got into a certain country to do a show. So record company had this presentation all set up, but it didn't hit gold. So they actually cut the gold record in half and presented them with half gold records because it hadn't actually achieved that status yet. And I'm like, man, that just hold off the ceremony, do something but that. Man, like, why would you cut a gold record in half?
That's crazy. I mean, you think about that, right? I mean, I like I said, I would put this up there with Zep 4, and I'd put it up there with, Volume 4 or maybe even Paranoid as one of the best early rock albums. I mean, this is a perfect record. But I was looking to it only hit 32 on the Billboard and number 1 on the UK albums chart. But then, it wasn't even certified in Britain and only certified gold in the US, which is, for this album, that's just nuts.
I think it was because of the precedence that in Rock set, and when it wasn't in Rock Part 2, I think people were like, well, I don't know, it isn't what I wanted. Yeah. As opposed to taking it and going, okay, but what is it? And do I like what it is? It isn't what I wanted it to be. That's what I think happened. Well,
and maybe I think we share a little bit of ground with this too. I like weird stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I really like eclectic albums. I mean, there are through lines on this album. It is, like I said, it is cohesive, even at the same time as it eclectic. But I like that we get Anyone's Daughter on the same album as Strange Kind of Woman and No One Came and Fireball and the mute. Like, I love that sort of the boldness and the confidence to say, yeah, this is what we feel like, and this is what we're gonna give you, and I hope you like it, and you should like it because it's amazing. So,
well, remember, I mean, my tastes are pretty varied. I listen to classical, I listen to new age, I listen to rock, I listen to some country, I listen to some rap. I mean, I like to think I have a pretty varied palette, although this is the music that is more my go-to, probably this and new age than anything else. But I'm happy to sit down and listen to Beethoven. I'm starting to get into Mozart and learn his catalog a bit. So yeah, I mean, I'm up for anything. And remember too, when we did that first Van Halen rankings episode with And the Podcast Will Rock, my favorite song was the spacey instrumental that everyone else was like last. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So well, let's check out some No One Came by Deep Purple. Okay, before we get into the vocals, which again, this is another example of we're just going to set the quick pace for the song and then we're going to jump right into lyrics, which was very common for them back then. This sound is just incredible. And I love that they're not exactly perfect with each other. Nowadays, your engineer would have been already copying and pasting and sliding things into place so everything's on the beat. This is human beings playing.
And if you did that, it would lose. This is what I was talking about with modern production aesthetics, right? Where you just lose that soul.
Yeah.
When on Baba O'Reilly, when Keith Moon comes in 10 beats per minute too fast and you hear him slow down, that's when I know I'm listening to a rock and roll band. And I love this one when it comes in too, because it's not on the one, which you don't realize until the drums come in, right? And I love when a song does that. It's so cool.
I'll point it out now because we'll be getting to it in the next season. But the intro to Space Truckin', they are also not perfectly together. And I love that. I just love that I can tell right now I'm listening to human beings that were recording in the moment. And it didn't have to be perfect, But what about the sound? I mean, between the guitar, the bass, and the organ, I mean, this is so heavy, so rich sounding. And again, we're listening to the 25th anniversary remix that Roger did. So it's a little bit better quality than the original mix, which I have to get away from the nostalgia of the original mix. But just listening to what we're getting sonically, and Kevin, I know it's a little muted for you because we're listening through Zoom, but man, this just pounds on your chest, and we aren't even getting a bass drum.
Well, and it's what I said earlier, right? It's Deep Purple sounds only like Deep Purple, and no one else, certainly no one else at that time sounds. It's because of John Lord, because no one else really had that guy who could play that Hammond, just that dirty, smoky, kind of slightly distorted Hammond organ. And he's only playing one note there, right? Yeah. Or maybe he's playing fifth. So I think he's only playing one note. But it just gives that whole, what is it, 8 bars maybe?
Yeah.
It just gives it such a weight and such a very specific sound. This is what I meant. Like, I would say Demon's Eye as well. The intro to that one's almost got a similar thing where I just can't think of any other song in the rock and roll canon that sounds anything like that, with those everyone playing on the bass register and blending it, so you get this really ominous, dirty. Well, Corey's favorite word is stank, right? And it's got a ton of stank on it.
Yeah, and I can't remember who it was that I was talking to this about. It might have been Mark Roback, or it could have been Corey. Just how we don't really have organ in bands anymore. Everything is so guitar centric, and maybe some samples are placed in there, but I really feel like it's such a lost flavor in music.
Mm-hmm. There's a band I've been listening to lately, I think I've talked to you about before, but Green Lung. And they do have, not necessarily always organ, but they've got synths in there, and they've got some different stuff in there, and they're bringing those elements back into stuff that sounds more like Deep Purple, Black Sabbath. It sounds more like that than it does, I don't know, Muse or any of the sort of the heavy, or I don't know, like I said, System of a Down. It's got, that's where its roots are. And it's got those kind of ethereal themes as well. So I think that when you listen to that, I think you'd probably quite enjoy them just on that side of it, because they bring some of that back in. Because it's lost as an art form, right?
Well, and just imagine, it's 1971. You're like, hey, the new Deep Purple album's out. I liked In Rock. I'll get this. And then you get to this song, and you're like, man, what have these guys created here?
I don't know what it is. I think I like it. I'm not sure.
But it's almost hypnotic too. It's almost like I've got to know where this is going.
Maybe it's because I'm only starting. I think it won't take too long. Maybe it's because I can see you laughing. I think you've got it wrong.
I'm just going to stop it here because I want to point out a couple things on the drums. And I'm sure you've spotted this too, Kevin, is the randomness of the kick and the hi-hat lifts.
Well, this is why Impace is so bloody hard to play along to, right? Because he doesn't play what a normal drummer would play.
Yeah.
Because he's so musical. He's such a musical drummer. And I love the rolls too, though, because that's a feature, not a bug with the Impace. Just those little rolls on the snare, they're just so tasty and so well played.
Yeah, his ghost notes and his snare playing. I mean, this is a guy that grew up on rudiments. You learn the rudiments, you learn how to play those, then you can do anything from there. Chasing Shadows is a variation on a paradiddle, and you learn, once you learn some of those rules, and you start like, okay, I understand where he's coming from now, but he puts in these flourishes. He's such a stylistic drummer that he's one of the few drummers that if he's playing on a track, unless he's being held back from being him, you could tell it's him on drums.
100%, yeah. Because he's busy, but not in a, because busy can usually have a negative connotation if you say someone's busy in the track. Ian Pace is busy in the track, but it's always exactly what the song needs.
Yes.
He's not getting in the way. He's just putting the accents in exactly the right places. Because the thing about this one, too, is there's not a ton of guitar going on. There's not a ton of like noodling in between. There aren't a lot of keyboard or guitar. We get the solos, obviously. So there is space for him to do that, right? He can fill in then, and he can put those little things in there. Of course, we get the bass later on is also excellent, but there's a lot of space in here for Ian Pace to show off.
Well, we're also getting the kicks off the beat too. It's da 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 boom boom. So he's filling in almost like the rhythm that's missing from the guitar and organ. And you got John Lord who's just hitting those strikes in between the lines, and along with Richie and Roger, and it's just like so powerful because they're giving the room for Ian to get his story through, but you don't feel like you're missing music in between there because what you're given is so heavy that it really kind of fills in the spaces. And I think I could compare this a little bit to Speed King, where you've got the music between the lines, and they're giving that room for the story to be told.
Yeah, I mean, this is all on the and, really, right? I mean, all the beat is on the and on this one, but the vocal then comes in on the one, so you get that, it's not syncopation exactly, but you get that sort of odd flow to the song. But again, we talked about this, like I said, and this isn't a weird song necessarily, but those kinds of little things, when I was young, I always took to those types of things. Now I actually have a vocabulary, or at least a little bit more understanding to know why. It fascinates me, where before it's just like, that just sounds different. It sounds so cool. Nothing sounds like that. And I don't know why, but I love it. And I think, like you said, I mean, just having again, though, it's just the groove, man. I mean, you've got a rhythm section here that, as you said, they've done in rock, but they've also played, quite a lot together before. They've a ton of shows. They just know how to sing.
Yeah.
They know what each other needs. They know what the song needs. And you get the sense that even though this is quite an intricate drum part and a good bass line, I bet you this was like, I bet you they got it first or second take.
Yeah.
this might even be the bed track, right? They might have just rehearsed it. Then we know what this is now. Let's just go lay the bed track down. That might be it, right? It might even be one of those.
It could be. And I've heard Ian Pace say, too, that if you can't get something done in 3 takes, like, you should just stop and do it on another day, because you're going to start overthinking things. What was the thing in that one take that I did that I really liked? I want to make sure I do that. And, you're starting to mentally piece the song together. You're not feeling it as much as you are, writing it with or playing it with intelligence. You want to just be in the moment. You want to just feel what you feel. And I think that's why Ian Pace doesn't have like a steady bass drum structure, because he's not playing a straight beat. He's playing what he feels in that moment.
Was that typical for Deep Purple then, or even Deep Purple around this time? Did they, when they went into recording studio, were they one of those bands who wrote in the studio, or did they go in more or less, okay, we know what the songs are, let's go in and play them, and then obviously with variation and sort of room to play within that structure? But what kind of recording band were they?
I think it was a combination. I know they wrote a lot of songs in the studio. They would have, they would either be doing it between shows, or they would take like a couple of weeks, and just like, okay, we're going to write for a couple of weeks and maybe do a show in between. But then you have some songs that were very spontaneous, like Highway Star was actually written on the tour bus going to a gig, because a reporter says, well, how do you guys write a song? And Richie sat down and just started going, and they started actually working on it in the tour bus. So I think, when you're a creative, you're always coming up with ideas, and maybe even they did something live and they're like, hey, what was that thing you did? Yeah. And then they developed the idea from that. But I know a lot of the stuff was written in the studio.
Yeah, because it's got a looseness to it, right? It feels like a jam. Yeah. It's got, obviously it's the structure of this song, and when things come in, there are parts that you would have to have planned, or you'd have to know at least, this starts on the and so this is where I'm going to put the accents or whatever it might be. But once you get into that, once you know that structure, and you've got these guys who are so good that they can drop into that fairly quickly, it's got that ease to it that just makes it feel very natural and very, very cool. Like I said, to me, the groove in this thing is just, it's insane how cool it is.
Well, you do get some insights if you get the 25th anniversary edition of Fireball, because you do get some of the, like the recordings of their jams, which are pretty interesting.
Cool. Okay.
One sounds a little bit drunk, but a fun night. It sounds like they had. But what I don't know exactly when they started this, but generally they would jam and they would record it, and then Roger would go back through the tapes and listen and pick out parts and go, okay, I think this is something that we can develop. This is rubbish. This is something good. I think we could put in there. And then they would start formulating the songs from there. I don't know if that was the process for In Rock, but I think that, at least by Fireball, I think that was what was going on.
Very cool.
But it's because you're not like, hey, I came up with a riff, I wrote this song, we're going to work on it. It's really very spontaneous. And I think there's an honesty to their music that comes from that just natural progression of developing a song, that I think is one of the things that makes them an attractive band. They aren't hey, we need to do a verse chorus because that's what the radio wants. Yeah. It's, here's what we wrote, like it or don't.
Well, and sorry, we'll get back into the song right away here, but I think that, taking that knowledge and saying, okay, well, they were, they wrote lots in the studio, it really just to speak to how good they were as a set of musicians, that, again, you look down the 9 songs or 7 songs on this record, to be able to do that for all those different types of songs and still pull it off, and still for all of them to be just top notch. Again, that speaks to, okay, they play with feel, and you believe every word they sing and all that kind of stuff, but just technically, they're really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they have the production side on top of that to just, make it sound as amazing as possible. So they had everything going for them, but it's kind of like, if you think about people that do fantasy sports or these fantasy, rock bands and stuff, it doesn't always work the way it does on paper.
You need the right 5 guys playing together. There is something about 5 specific guys playing together that is just different from, you take any one of those guys out and put someone else in. It might still be as good, might be better, but it's not going to be the same. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe I could be like Robin Hood, like an outlaw dressed all in green. Someone said, what's he gonna turn out like? Someone else said, never mind.
I love that line. I love that he doesn't rhyme it. He doesn't bother with rhyming it. Someone said, what's he going to turn out like? Someone else said, never mind.
Yeah, he's a bit cheeky on this album, thinking about some of those extra lines in Anyone's Daughter and no. He likes throwing in a quip here and there. I feel like Ian felt very comfortable on this album.
It's very good. I mean, the lyrics throughout this whole album are very good. This song, it's almost got a Dylan-like quality to it in that he's not really that concerned with syllabic meter.
Right.
You know, it's not ba 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 bam bam ba. It's kind of just, you know, these are the words that I've got. I need to fit them in, and I'll get them all in.
Yeah.
But there might be 8 syllables in this line and 9 or 10 in that one or whatever else. And I like it when a writer's good enough to be able to do that and to know that you can't really take any of those words out of that first verse. Yeah. You need them all, right? There's no fat in there, but yeah, he still makes it work. And again, I mean, the scene we're set in is, to me, it's just it's like that sardonic, sarcastic, you know, bitter almost look at the music industry and the bullshit that it all is. And looking back, and some of the lines in this song just crack me up. They're funny. They're genuinely funny, right?
Well, and two, I mean, musically, it's actually really simple. The song structure, the writing of it is very simple. The performance of it is something else. You know, like you could look at this and go, okay, we'll just play the kickoff beat and do a hi-hat lift here and there. But the performance of it is what really brings it to life. But I love just that little transition because we're not getting a lot from the musicians. What we get is powerful, but it's like I said earlier, mostly open space. And then just that da 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 da. It just feels
that turnaround is fantastic.
Yeah, I love that.
But that's the mark of a good band, right? I mean, if you knowing, so we said earlier, right, knowing when to play and knowing when not to. And I find that with a lot of bands these days, they don't know when not to play. Yeah. You've got to fill the whole sonic spectrum. You can't have everything's got to be brick walled. The guitars have all got to be turned up. The bass should always be playing. Everyone's got to be playing. Yeah. You know, got to make sure everyone knows I'm there. Leave a bit of space. Let the song breathe. Let it breathe, man. Gillan's doing a good job with the lyrics here. Just let him go.
Exactly. And the thing is, too, is that these guys, they're going to get their solo sections. They know that they're going to have their point to come through. So it's like, you know what? I'm happy to just be playing my part. When it's my time to shine, I'm going to shine the fuck out of it. Yeah. But for now, I'm going to play the part I'm supposed to play to be playing for the song. And I think you're right. I think now everybody's like, what? There's a blank note there. We got to put something in. Let's get a sample. Let's get, I don't know, write an extra line. Like, you know, everything has to be just full to the max. And I think it's so wearing on the ears.
Do you think too, though, that I talked earlier about, I like this production aesthetic. I like the early 70s rock production aesthetic because you do, you know, there's not as much bass on everything, right? So it's not saturated. So like we said, I mean, Pace is doing a lot of work. Ian Pace is doing a lot of work on this song and filling in. He's adding all that color. Yeah. But because he's so good and he can vary how hard he hits the snare, or he can change the way he's playing triples, or whatever it might be, it doesn't overwhelm you, but it still gives you something to listen to while this simple that's going on. Yeah. There's still something to actually listen to. You know?
And that's very typical of his playing too, is that he, especially in this era, you know, I mean, the guy's in his early 20s. You know, think about he's in a hugely successful band. Condition. Yeah, and he's only been playing since he was 15 or 16. So I mean, he's still pretty new at being a drummer, and look at how good he is.
It's just sickening, absolutely sickening.
When you think about the age of these guys, like we think of them now and you know, they're historic, they're, you know, prolific or whatever, they're a big part of our musical history, but they're kids. I mean, they're kids. Yeah.
But I think I'm just reading Mike Campbell's autobiography at the moment, which is a fantastic read. Even if you're not a huge Heartbreakers fan, anyone who's a musician and has grown up and played in bands and sort of, you know, tried to get a career as a musician would relate to it. But it's the same thing with, you know, if he only started playing at 15, 16, but I bet he played every single second that he could.
Yeah.
And that's what makes the difference. You can't get away from the fact that you've got to practice. And if you don't practice, you won't get to that level. And if that's all you do and all you care about, if you've also got the raw talent, you need that natural talent and rhythm and time and all those kinds of things. But you've got to put the hours in. And clearly, this guy played until his fingers bled. You know?
Oh, yeah. And I heard an interview with Yngwie recently where he said, I never practiced, but I played all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's why his style is so soloish all the time, because he says practice is repetition. It's perfecting things. It's exercises. I just played. And that's how I learned how to play, was just by constantly playing. And I get that. As a guitarist, I could see that being why you would be a good soloist. I'm not a big fan of his because for me, my taste, he overplays the songs. I really like his first couple albums, but beyond that, he just kind of lost me And it's just not a style of music I particularly enjoy, but that goes back to that shredder theory that I have. But I get why he's that way, because he's not like, I'm going to learn how to play chords. I'm going to learn how to do this and that and just practice it over and over. I'm not going to play scales until I've got them all memorized. I just need to know where the notes are.
Which is fine. I mean, like I said, it's that style of music, but it doesn't hold any attraction for me either.
Yeah.
I quite like form. I like it when there is structure, and then I like it when people subvert that structure deliberately. And again, we talk about this album's full of little moments of subversion and going off the beaten path, but it's all controlled and it's all deliberate. When it's your Malmsteens and those guys, it's just like, it's a bit too free and a bit almost freeform jazzy, where you think, okay, well, but are you ever going to get back to the hook, or are you going to? Is there a hook even? Is it all just so?
Well, I don't feel it's connected to the song. Like I talk about Richie and Mick Box and Steve Morris and guys like that, and Jimmy Page, I could put in this category where when they solo, I feel like they're playing within the song. They understand
100%.
what the song is, but then you get somebody like Yngwie, or I could say this about Steve Vai or any of those guys, where I feel like they've lost the context of the song sometimes when they're doing their solos, because I'm not feeling the song in the solo. I'm feeling like they just walked in and said, I'm going to play something. Hopefully it works. Just put it on the song.
Yeah, that was my comment on a lot of those Kiss songs, is like, it sounded like they just said, well, the solo's at 120 beats a minute in E minor, then it goes to F. Play something.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Without hearing the song even. It's like, well, I mean, you can do that, but that's stupid.
Yeah, give me 18 bars in G major.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Big and bold, more than twice as old as all the cats I'd ever seen. I grew my hair and bought a suit of shiny white. It wasn't cream. I shook and shivered and danced and quivered and stood on a mountaintop. No one came from miles around and said, man, your music is really hot.
You know, I almost feel like John Lord is picking up the rhythm a little bit there. It seems like he's putting in a few extra stabs that are kind of almost joining in pace a little bit.
It is percussive, right? I mean, all he's doing to this point is really sort of a percussive style of playing. There's no arpeggiated notes. There's no real, he's not playing any melody lines. It is just those stabs. Again, it's what the song needs. But I just want to come to that. I mean, we've got to talk about No One Came From Miles Around. I mean, that is one of the best. I mean, to sum up the life of a band trying to make it in one line, that's it. Right there, right?
Yeah. Well, and my interpretation of this, and I want to say I read this somewhere, was that it's really about the fear that you're going to have a big concert and no one's going to turn up. Like, think about playing, Wembley Stadium. Right. And, you're expecting this is going to be a big day. You're going to have a huge crowd, a sea of people. You're only going to see the first 20 rows, but they're out there. You're going to hear them just scream your name, and you get there and you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Imagine what that would be like.
It's just perfect. And I mean, I love too, though, No One Came is kind of funny on its own, but From Miles Around, that's the kicker, man. It's like, that's such a good turn of phrase, That's what separates. I mean, Gillan's a great lyricist, and that's what separates those guys from me at that level, is they always just add that little bit of extra sauce to it.
Yeah, and me, I'm like, okay, what can I rhyme with blue? Yeah, there is a certain magic, and I think this is like more of a free-form song where it doesn't have to rhyme. It just has to be, just tell the story. I mean, he's singing, but he's kind of half talking, half singing.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of prose works really well for a song like this. Anyone's Daughter is a little more singing, but it's kind of the same thing. It's like, I'm really just telling the story.
It's almost the talking blues that, again, Dylan does all this, right? But it's also, I think sometimes the assumption can be, well, that's easy to do because you don't have to. It's harder to do to make sure that it's not gratuitous and make sure that it's not jarring. You've got to have a really good sense of rhythm and a good sense of, again, structure and melody and all those kinds of things. And again, to me, it really, really shines on this song, vocally, lyrically, everything. And again, I mean, this is what I was going to be all upset when I say this. This is why I think I prefer Gillan over Coverdale. I think Gillan's got more. He's got a bit more theatricality to his style, where he's got that little bit of that glint in his eye and that little bit of vaudeville that I don't know that I've ever heard from Coverdale. Maybe I've just not listened to enough, but I don't quite get that. Like, I don't think Coverdale could sing this song. I don't think it would sound right in his mouth.
Yeah, I would agree with that. We're really talking two different styles because even thinking about, and I know I've talked about this on the show, it hasn't aired yet, so you wouldn't have heard it, but how a band like the Scorpions or Whitesnake has made a career on songs that are basically about love or sex or loving sex or trying to get sex. And you look at a band like Deep Purple and during the Gillan years, they really weren't focused on that. It was sometimes political, but it was a lot of storytelling, a lot of, hey, here's something that popped into my head. Let's write a song about it. And wasn't necessarily having to depend on those tropes to write music. So, for Coverdale to be kind of quippy, really the most I can think of is a song called Would I Lie to You, which was on the Come and Get It album. And it's Would I Lie to You is the chorus. Would I lie to you? Would I lie to you? Would I lie to you? Just to get in your pants.
Oh, jeez.
and he says it with kind of that same kind of quippy, almost throwaway speak instead of singing. But that's about as cheeky as he gets, really. He's more like the, metaphor for sex guy, like spit it out or slide it in. But that's his style. I don't see him singing a song like this because this kind of storytelling is just not what he does.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where, again, I mean, I still, like I said, I love, Byrne, I love Stormbringer, but there's something about this that's got a specific character that really just resonates with me. But I like if I can smile while I'm enjoying a song musically and lyrically and vocally, that's just kind of the best of all worlds in a lot of cases.
Yeah,
do you think sometimes rock and rollers or heavy metal people take themselves far too seriously? Just way too seriously.
Absolutely.
Lighten up. Music can be fun.
Right. And I think sometimes it's the persona, if you think of, early days of metal, we always had to wear black. We always had to wear leather. We always had to look angry and like we wanted to kill somebody. Like there was a persona that went with being metal. I think Megadeth is probably a perfect example of that because I can't think of a single old picture of Dave Mustaine coming close to smiling. He's always angry and frowning. And that's that, you have to be that way. What I love about Metallica is that they really kind of opened that up to where, hey, we've been in therapy. We hug each other on stage. We're not afraid to show emotion and get, hey, I'm going through something right now. And who would have thought in 1985 that a metal band would ever talk like that?
Yeah, it's a good thing. It's a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
All of us men, we should be talking about these things. That's
we should.
Okay to do.
And it's amazing that you can still go out there and you can write a song like Enter Sandman or Disposable Heroes or any of those songs that have been, huge in the heavy metal canon. But you can also be human beings outside of what you write and what you perform. And I think there's something about selling the gimmick, I guess, and I see that more the gimmicky side of music. But to be human beings and to say, hey, there's stuff going on underneath of all of this, I think is a pretty cool thing to be able to do.
Absolutely.
You know what else is cool, Kevin?
Hit it.
I knew what they meant because I was a freak. Oh, my throat was tired and warm. My pretty face just looked out of place as they poured on the scorn. I wrote on yellow paper from a man who was the king. He said my boy will have some crazy scenes. There weren't any scenes at all like he was talking about. Yeah, he must have been the king of queens.
When he sings too, when he sings talking about, I love that you can tell that, as a singer, he's left all the air out of his lungs to get that line because it sounds just like he's almost lost control of the line.
Yeah.
But it's a very specific technique and a way of singing that. So again, I just think vocally he's fantastic on this. I mean, he's not Scribby, he's not Child in Time, he's not, going his full range, but he's playing this, he's inhabiting this character. And he's selling this character to us just so perfectly. And the other thing I love about this too is that turnaround from the chorus out into the next verse. You get, man, your music is really hot. Well, I knew what they meant. So that continues. There's no break then between the chorus and the verse. Again, just as a songwriter, I think anytime you can sort of blur those lines and make that narrative flow through, and it doesn't happen in the, all the way through. Right. But I like that kind of little device, that little songwriting device is just super cool.
Yeah, it really is. And I love that line, like, he talks about the scenes, but there weren't any scenes. I love when you write like that kind of throwback to something you just said, instead of saying, well, that never happened. You're actually using the same term, which I've always loved that. And then you've just got Ian Pace. He just feels like he doesn't even care. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but he's like, I'm just going to play. I feel like I'm in a zone. I'm just going to play and throw in all these flourishes that they're not distracting, but there's so much going on the drums, but yet we're still getting, you're able to hear Ian Gillan. You're able to feel everything Ian Pace is like. It's such a amazing balance in this song, all the things that are going on, yet you can hear them all at the same time.
You notice too, though, I got to listen as we play this up again. The stuff that did it, the organ bit that John Lord's playing, that's the one. So he's marking the one.
Right.
Usually they'd have a cymbal hit there. And I don't think there's a ton of big splashy crashing around on the cymbals on this. He's not.
No.
The hat lifts are great. And he's doing the rolls and things. That's, the primary accents, the stuff he's putting beyond. But he's not going heavy on the cymbals, which again, I think is just an atypical thing for this kind of song, this kind of band anyway.
Right. And even after a lot of the little fills and stuff where just naturally as a drummer, you would put in, you end every fill on a crash. That's typically the way it goes. There's not a lot of that. There's a lot of just snare work, which is, I think, part of the magic, because I think cymbals would be distracting in this particular song.
Yeah, but just the sonic palette that they've built it's not quite right. So yeah, I mean, again, just master composer.
He's hitting them pretty much just on the one, I think, and just like after a major.
Maybe, I'd have to listen again. Yeah,
a lot of those more.
I only just thought of this.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right though. A lot of the more gentle snare fills and just the buzzes that he's doing on the snare, you're not getting the crash cymbal. The bigger fills, if he's going to the toms, then he ends it with a crash.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Great observation though.
Write a million songs about the things I've done. I could never sing them, so they never get sung. Well, it's a law for the rich, one for the poor, and there's another one for singers. It's die young and live much longer, and spend your money and sit and wonder.
Okay, now he's even building. He's adding more kicks. Now we're getting that ba-bumpa, which is that sort of swing feel to it. Also, Roger is getting a little bit more adventurous and starting to play up and down the fretboard a little bit. This is one thing that I've noticed about them, is that they'll start off and say, here's what the song is going to be. Here's the foundation. But then as the song goes on, they do these subtle additions to it, these subtle changes. And I always say they're not a copy-paste band. The first verse is not what every verse is going to be like musically. Everything evolves and develops, and they're always changing and building. And I think that's another part of their magic.
I mean, all great bands do that. I mean, or they should try to do that. It's something we sort of picked up on Corey and I on when we covered Foo Fighters. Foo Fighters don't tend to do that all the time. Like, this is the chorus, this is the verse, that's how we do them. And it's until you're listening critically. I mean, and if you're just sitting and rock along, some they're great. But if you are listening critically, you think, I'd kind of like something else in there now. I'd like a little bit of extra percussion, or I'd like a little, maybe go an octave up on the bass for a few measures or something, do something to move the song along and keep that interest level up. Right. Like I said, with this one, it's so subtle that they almost sneak it in the back door, right? Where you're not even paying attention, you don't even see it coming.
Yeah.
But then after because I don't think I'd actually heard that bum bum until we listened to it, and I'm like, yeah, he's double kicking there. That's cool,
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's that they don't make a point out of it. They just kind of just naturally, I just started playing more and more and more, and the next thing you know, we had a different song. I look at a band like the Police too, and the Police were also like that. And it's harder for a 3-piece because you don't have as many people to be adding to the track. But if you listen to the first verse versus the last verse of a Police song, they're never the same.
No, 100%. Yeah. And it can be just something as simple as, Copeland or Andy Summers. His trick he'll be muting, he'll be playing the notes muted, and then he'll just open it up gradually, and he'll be playing full chords then and letting them ring a little bit longer. Yeah. And then so you get that sonic difference, even though you're not actually really playing anything different.
Yeah, exactly. It's great stuff.
No one came from miles around, said, man, your music is really funky.
So I just wanted to, we were talking earlier about Van Halen, and I'm a huge fan of Eddie Van. I mean, you know, I'm a big Van Halen fan, but this is where I think
what?
but this is where I think that because he was a huge fan of Richie Blackmore, and Clapton as well. But this is where I always get way more Richie than Clapton in Eddie's playing, because he does what Richie does as well, which is put little things in underneath the solo. Mm-hmm. They're just little throwaway grace notes or little that whammy bar bend, that that little thing that he does. It's just a little accent, just a little flavor. It's not just like you were talking about, like stock hoodler or just like this, general pentatonic scales. He's just putting those little bits and pieces in to make it more than it would be if he didn't put them in. And I just always really appreciate his playing on these types of solos.
He's basically doing what Ian Pace does on the snare, but for guitar.
Yeah,
just throwing in these little flourishes. And I just love how his playing is just so smooth. It doesn't matter what he's playing. It just has such a flow to it. It feels very natural. And to think that this probably wasn't planned out at all. This is just like, this is what I'm feeling right now, And I love the way it starts out with just, holding on that note for a bit before he moves on to play other notes. Just that's always a fun thing for me, because you're like, okay, he's laying the foundation. Where's he going to go from here? And just like kind of uses that as a root for the structure of the solo. I've always loved that.
Well, yeah, you need somewhere to go, right? Mm-hmm. Don't blow it all up. Don't set all the fireworks off at once. You need to build some.
Exactly.
So when he goes high at the end there and he starts making it well, because he's been quite reserved, and we know John can play the shit out of anything. This guy's a classical pianist, anything. But it's just when he just lets the dog off the leash a little bit right at the end there, right? He's playing those little sort of trills, and and the tone of that when it gets up higher. I always love that Hammond when it's in that higher register, because you get that distortion. It sounds dirty. It's cool.
It does. And I like when Ian Pace goes to the ride there in the middle of John's solo, because it really kind of opens up the song a bit. But what's amazing is from the beginning of the song, and we're 4 minutes in now, all we've gotten is dun 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 dun. It's through the whole song, but yet it feels like we're being treated to this whole palette of sounds. The other thing is, I feel like, and I think this is interesting for a song as heavy as this, how patient both Richie and John's solos are. They're not going crazy. They could absolutely just go off on a song like this, but they're very specific to the way that they're playing. And John Lord's opening up a little bit now, but it's still very controlled.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great organ player. And an organ, I mean, some keyboard players are great piano players. I mean, I play piano. I don't really play organ because I don't have the chops that this guy has about knowing when to play those double stops, or when to, play 2 notes or 3 notes, or when to trill, or when to go into the 7th. He's just got all that sort of, he just knows that intuitively and naturally. But like you said, it's because he pulls it all back and then just leaves it right till the very end. Mm-hmm. But he still puts little, just interesting licks in. And again, he's not doing the same thing over and over again.
Right.
He's doing some triplets in there where he's coming across the beat. Right. There's a few of those, and it's such like 2 or 3 times. Then he's playing the big sort of 2 or 3 chords, and then he's going off on little small runs. And then at the end, we get the crescendo. It's just, again, it's a masterclass in how you build a solo that you don't hear many guys pull off,
Yeah, and this is a big reason where I think about today's music and how much I miss the organ. You know, but Richie and John, they did these great trade-offs, and the way that Richie's solo went right into John's, was great, because there's usually like a separator. You know, I'll do my part, then we're going to unite, and then you do your part. And here it just blends from one right into the other, which is not as common.
Yeah, it's interesting too, though, right? When you've got, because most of the time, if you've got Richie Blackmore in your band, you don't need anyone else being able to play lead. And yet, Deep Purple have got John Lord.
Right, but when you've got John Lord in your band, you also don't you don't need anybody. You know, it's almost like there's too much in this band. You know, but
embarrassment of riches.
But they find a way to balance it that I think is really the key. And then we've got, you know, Roger and Ian Pace are really reserved during these solo sections. They're putting in a little bit of color, but they're really just laying foundation. And much like the way the band was letting Ian tell the story, Roger and Ian Pace are just letting them solo and just backing them up. So they've really dropped back on the intensity of what they're playing. And it's, again, that subtle thing that you don't even notice that they've dropped back until you notice it.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, I believe that I must tell the truth and say things as they really are. But if I told the truth and nothing but the truth, could I ever be a star? Nobody knows who's real and who's faking. Everyone's shouting out loud. It's only the glitter and shine that gets through. Where's my Robin Hood outfit?
Now you'll notice the feeling changed halfway through the verse because Ian Pace went back to the hi-hat. And it just changed the whole dynamic of the song. But I love that line that I believe that I must tell the truth and say things as they really are. Like, you're going to do both?
Yeah. But if I told the truth and nothing but the truth, could I be a star? That's that thing of, you've got to, can't say everything you feel. But then, I mean, and they get that, the pairing of that is, it's only the glitter and shine that gets through. Where's my Robin Hood outfit?
Right.
So we get that call back to the first verse with the Robin Hood outfit, right?
Yeah.
And it's got, again, that's that little glib sort of, it's almost like he's just thinking out loud, right? This character in this song. It's not a song, it's this stream of consciousness of this guy just laying out all he's airing his grievances to the world, right? And I think it's just geniusly, that in that sort of context, again, when you read it through, it reads through as just a rant from this lunatic, and yet it's all very cleverly arranged into the structure of this song. Like I said, I just think it's way harder than it sounds to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense when you really think about the meaning of it. Like, you know, you can shine a little bit, but you better play the game if you want to be successful. Yeah. And it's really interesting that we're listening to this today. And I don't want to, you know, open up a whole can of worms by bringing this up. But if you think about what's going on today as we're recording this with Disney and the controversy over the new Snow White movie, and I don't know if you've been following this at all, but Rachel Ziegler, who was the one that played Snow White, and Gal Gadot was I guess the nemesis, and I haven't seen it, but Rachel has been very outspoken in the press, talked about some of her political views, made some comments about the movie and about the original movie, and that have been very unfavorable and have been driving people to really dislike her, and it kind of proves the point of the song that, you know what, just shut up, play your role, do what you're supposed to do, and you'll be fine. And I it's interesting because rock and roll guys go against the grain, right? Like, your natural thing is whatever you're told to do, you do the opposite.
Yeah, it's that thing of what machine do you think they're raging against? The washing machine?
Right.
No.
Right. But I would also make the argument to Ian's point here is that stick to what you're supposed to be doing. Like, if I'm out there promoting an album or a film and I want to start talking politics, that's not promoting what I'm doing. That's going to alienate certain people away from maybe the art or maybe me as an artist, and they're not going to want to hear what I'm doing. And they really are separate things that should be dealt with on separate platforms.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because they're still human beings. And I mean, it's that thing of, I don't always agree with, you're a sportsman, just shut up and play. Or I don't want to see, okay, but I mean, or you don't get to say, what are you to say anything about politics? You're not a politician. So we're all voters. We're all, I mean, I think everyone should be having their say on politics. And if you have a platform, of course, then you are able to reach a bunch of people. Now, I mean, I don't know what this young woman has said, but,
I think
it's interesting there's any furore about it. I mean, what is it anything worse than anything Sid Vicious said You know?
Well, that's true. Well, let me put it this way. They have pulled her from a lot of the appearances she was supposed to make. Gal Gadot refuses to appear with her on any further like it's become like a major thing.
Wow. Okay.
So, I mean, for someone of Gal Gadot's pull, that's a pretty big statement. For Disney, that's a pretty big statement. But I think it's kind of a thing. Like, I don't want to go to a concert and see a band, pay my $60 or whatever to see a band perform and then get a political rant that has nothing to do with their music. I go there to see their music. And I think nowadays we have so many podcasts and so many media outlets where you would have the ability to say, go on Politically Incorrect or a show like that where you would have a forum to talk about those issues and kind of separate the two things. Because you really do stand to alienate your fans to get your message through. And if you're talking to people that aren't wanting to listen, what's the point of making that message in that forum? So, but I also get hey, here's my chance to say what I'm feeling.
Of course, yeah.
Especially where we're supposed to have free speech. It's such a difficult issue. It
is for sure, yeah. It's complicated.
I'm back and forth on it, but I think if you see that things are going wrong, you need to adjust.
I mean, or just don't take the job if it doesn't line up with your ethics. I mean, that's an easy one, or your morals. That's easy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But yeah, Sid Vicious, that's a great example.
Well, I've come and I've gone before your winking eye. No one even cared enough to say goodbye. The money's good and the times you have fun and games galore, but you spend your money and you lie in bed forgotten and wonder what you did it for. No one came from miles around and said, man, who's he?
Okay, before we get to the musical insanity, this to me, Kevin, and I want to get your take on this, because to me, this is all about like bands who hit it big and disappeared. Like we had our riches, we thought we were going to be really successful, and then it was just gone. No one remembers us, and now we just have whatever our riches and spoils were from whatever element of success we had. And I think about bands like Poison, who were hugely successful and then weren't. And I remember hearing stories about, like Ricky Rocket was seen painting billboards in Los Angeles because that's the work he could get at the time. And I think, wow, you think about how successful you are. You think, I've made it. I'm there. I've arrived. And now I'm in that, and I'm going to be on that train. And then it just gets gone. And like all the one-hit wonders from the 80s and all these bands that found success, and then how many of them are remembered? How many of those like top 10 bands that you forgot videos are there? And really amazing.
For sure. I think that's that thing where, if you are actually good, you'll still be able to get pickup sessions. You'll still be able to, go and sit in or whatever it might be. It's a lot of these guys in your Poisons and your Motley Crues. Well, who's going to? I mean, first of all, they're just a bad hang. Like they're going to be trouble because there's going to be all sorts of drama and there's going to be all kinds of prima donna and all that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, then you also get this guy he's an okay musician. He's a competent musician. Is he really a good musician? Well, I'll go and hire Jim Keltner rather than Tommy Lee, because Jim Keltner will come in, he'll know the part, he'll nail it first time, he won't cause any aggro, and he'll probably make the song better. You know what I mean? So I think that there's that side of it. But yeah, No One Came is an internal monologue. It's this guy talking to himself and trying to reason with himself whether was any of this worth it? Like, does anyone care? No one came. I don't know. Where's my Robin Hood outfit? There's all these kind of little interjections where he's almost sort of trying to talk himself into it, but isn't sure. Like, there's this indecision. It never really resolves either, which I'd like. So there isn't an answer at the end of this, and said, man, who's he? So it's like they still don't know. Right. Still don't know who this guy is. No one came from miles around, and that's where we end it. So I love the fact that we don't get this nice, clean bopper and everything. It's just this stream of consciousness, this internal monologue of this guy who's struggling with place in the music industry, or the fact that maybe he's going to be playing to 1,000 people, like you said, or maybe he's going to be playing to 10.
Right.
I just think that it's just that nice little snapshot. It doesn't need to be bigger than it is, because what it is perfect as it's presented.
Yeah. And I think this is one thing I love about music over movies, because I feel like unless you're watching an independent film or the incredibly rare Hollywood film, everything has to tie up into a nice little bow. Everything needs to have a resolve. Every character needs to be addressed, and every storyline needs to be satisfied. Whereas I feel like in music, you can leave something kind of ambiguous like this. You can just say, here's what happened. Where it goes from here, we'll see. But you never.
We're just telling you what happened.
Yeah,
we're not offering an opinion on it. We're not being didactic. We're just saying, "There's what happened, dude."
Yeah, and I think Bob Dylan was a master of that. He's like, I'm just telling the story. You know, I've said many times, like I am not a fan of listening to Bob Dylan. He's just not my genre of music. I don't care for that style. But I will say he is one of the best storytellers we've ever had. And he could write lyrics like this, absolutely, and just leave it kind of open-ended. But still, you feel like you've been told a story that's complete up to the point the story stopped.
Yeah. It was up to the point that Dylan didn't want to tell you the story anymore. Right?
Right, yeah, exactly. Or forgot what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Pure magic to me. I mean, the combination of tones that we're getting there is just incredible. And then that drop and just waiting so patiently for it to start again. And remember, guys, we're not recording with click tracks in 1971. So that is a band that's recording together in a studio, looking at each other, signaling when they're going to start, and they all come back in together.
I did do my Petty podcast. I didn't realize this was a thing back in the day where there's no click track, but quite often they would just create their own. Mm-hmm. So someone would just tap on their thigh, or they would hit a box or whatever it might be, and they'd record that for however long they needed to do it.
Yeah.
So then you get a human click track, which is even better because then you get that feel again, right? And then it might speed up just a little bit, and it might slow down just a little bit, and depending on who's doing the click track. But I like that kind of, again, this song is just, it's loose in the right way. Mm-hmm. There's nothing loose about it because everyone's tight playing, but it's got that to it,
It still feels free and open though, but they're very together. And I know that when they played Anyone's Daughter live in more, in the 2000s plus, when they started doing it live again, we see Ian Pace kind of moving the stick back and forth in like a metronome fashion to help John Lord set the tempo for the song so that he can then come in after the opening. So I wonder if maybe that's something like that might have been going on in the studio where Ian's kind of giving the signal. But I can also see Richie just going, I'm going to hold this note until I don't feel like holding it anymore. And then I'm just going to wave my hand and signal and we'll all come in.
Or just make eye contact, right? There's yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think the fact that they came in so tight, it's just that much sweeter.
Yeah. They're just bloody good musicians, man. I mean, these are top tier talents, right? I mean, we're not dealing with, fly by night. These are guys who could have played in any band. Mm-hmm. They're kind of the best at what they do. Every single one of them. It's the same with Zepp, right? You got four guys who they just knew what they were doing. They're all brilliant musicians. Mm-hmm. And they just chose, well, I'll play bass in this band. I could play what Jimmy's playing. That's no problem. Right. But I'll play bass because we've not got a bass player. So,
Yeah. And again, really a 3-piece band because Robert Plant didn't play an instrument.
Yeah.
So
which is crazy.
Pretty big sound for a 3-piece band when you think about it. I mean, it's amazing. You look at Rush, but Geddy Lee. I mean, you have basically three musicians and a vocalist, but the vocalist doubles. But you still only got 3 people playing sounds. Yeah. And you look at the Police, and it's really amazing what a 3-piece band can do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you talked about it earlier. I mean, man, imagine Ian Pace, Richie Blackmore, and Phil Lynott. Oh, that would be a cooking power trio,
Well, yes, but apparently the reason that it didn't work out, or what I've heard the reason it didn't work out is because Phil was not that good back then. He was not. He was not the guy he would go on to be. He was pretty young and didn't quite have the chops that they needed, which is why it didn't happen. There is a recorded jam session out there. It has never surfaced. I hope one day that it does. It's probably sitting in someone's basement or attic, probably degraded to the point of not being listenable, but that would certainly be something I would love to hear.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to hear that too, yeah.
Yeah.
madness.
It is. I mean, this is one of those songs where I really want to chase that fade and just like follow it and see where they went after that. Because I mean, this could go on
for how
another
long?
4 or 5 minutes, and I would sit there and listen to every second of it. And I love that the music has gone back to being so basic. They're just playing that foundation again. They're not throwing a lot of flourishes in it. I mean, you're barely getting fills from Ian Pace. You're just getting rhythm from Roger and Richie, and just letting John do his thing.
Yeah, it's again, I mean, this is one of the reasons I picked this, because it's one of those sneaky masterpieces that maybe you don't think about when you think about Fireball, and you think about Child in Time, and you think about, you know, Smoke on the Water. And I don't know where fans stand on Smoke on the Water. Is that one of those? Is it like Bo Rap, where Deep Purple fans don't listen to it anymore because it's too Smoke on the Water? Probably is one of those.
Yeah.
But still, a brilliant song. Or there's so many of those. But this one for me is one of those what I go to where I think this is just an absolute masterpiece from a band that the only Deep Purple could have done this.
Yeah, I would
can't
agree.
imagine anyone else doing this. You know.
It's funny that, you know, people do complain about the overplayedness of Smoke on the Water, but yet when they do it live, as soon as you hear those first 3 notes, the entire crowd is on their out of their seats and screaming, and I'm like, which is it? You know, but
overplayed to me is always a thing that I don't. If I'm talking about the quality of a song, whatever it might be, you know, in the Queen podcast, we talked about Bohemian Rhapsody, we talked about Somebody to Love, and We Will Rock You, and We're the Champions. Mm-hmm. When you take away all that over familiarity with those songs and you just listen to them for what they are, there's a reason why Don't Stop Me Now has been played 2 billion times on Spotify. It's because it is a fantastic song.
Right.
It's got a great melody, it's got a great beat, it's got a great piano part. There's a reason why Smoke on the Water has been played so much. It's because it's got one of those iconic riffs that's just 3 notes.
Yeah.
Right, and it's got a brilliant freaking drum part. It's got a great evocative lyric. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why it's so big. It's not the song's fault that it's been overplayed.
Right, and the thing is that it became overplayed because people enjoyed it in the first place. So it was a good song. People clung to it, and I get that there's a difference between deciding to put it on at home, hearing it come on a commercial, or when you're watching a hockey game, because it's often played at hockey games. Or just being there in the moment with the band and seeing them perform it. There's a different energy to that, and I do get that. But yeah, I think there is that factor. But a song like this, you get structure, you get patience. This is an incredibly patient song for the musicians, really just laying back and staying in the foundation for the majority of the song, with the exception of the color that Ian Pace brings and a little bit from Roger. This is a rare pocket song for Deep Purple.
Well, and you think about it, on an album that's got virtuosity all over it. There are moments of virtuosity sprinkled all over this, and it's this one's one of those that, again, musicians tend to, don't be snobby about this, but musicians tend to listen to songs differently. There's a lot going on in this song when you really listen to it, and underneath sort of the very basic structure. Mm-hmm. But that alone makes it incredible to me, because, like you said, most bands would throw way more into this. There'd be way more kitchen sink in this song than it would need, and it would interfere with what's a really busy lyric. Yeah. It needs that space because of what the lyric is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and overplaying is very common, and I think that's another thing that is part of the charm of Deep Purple, is they really know when to push and they really know when to lay back, and they create a great balance in these songs. I mean, the solos were great solos, but they weren't flashy. They were very much within the song. You get these nice flourishes and just randomness from Ian Pace that I think really help that train keep moving down the track, because we're not getting a lot of play from Roger. I mean, he's playing what he plays, but he's not all over the place like he is in a song like No, No, No. He's very pocket in this song, and same as he was in Fools, just very straightforward playing. So he's another one, like, I know when to be bass player and I know when to be colory bass player. And I think that's part of the magic of this whole band, is they just know how to make that balance happen.
Yeah, the notes you play, the notes you don't play are very, very important.
Very much so. Now,
Roger Glover's not playing exactly the right notes on this song.
Yes, exactly. Now, for those of you who want to hear what John Lord was playing without it being backwards, if you get the 25th anniversary edition of Fireball, you are treated to a backwards piano track. I will not play it on this episode of the show, because it is the reason that this episode of the Deep Purple podcast got banned. They got cited for copyright violation, not for any song on the album, but for the backwards piano on Fireball. No One Came.
Wow.
You know what it is it comes down to who owns the publishing. and what the publishing rights are set for each individual track on YouTube. So you could get banned, but it's all looked at as one episode. If you get flagged for one thing, the whole episode is flagged. It's not like they'll say, well, take this chunk out, you'll be okay. You could do that and re-upload it, but that's a waste of time, to be honest. But yeah, I found that fascinating. But it is an interesting thing because the way that they had to do this, because remember, this is not digital. We're recording on analog reel-to-reel tape.
Yeah.
So the band had to record the song. Then you have to mark where it should start and stop. We flip the tape over, and John Lord is actually playing to this song being played backwards. So if you think back to...
Oh, is he really?
Yeah. So if you think back to Fault Line, where from Deep Purple, the third album, where they had two of the members playing forwards, then they flipped the tape over and two of the members are playing backwards. That's how you make that happen back then. Now you would just play along to the song, you would flip it over and you would go, okay, well, this sounds good. All right, redo it. Or, yeah, I want to place this here. And you could manipulate it so easily. But back then, 1971, you just got to get in there and make it happen.
That is fascinating. I mean, I imagine that he knew how many bars it was, and maybe they just played the drum track for him so he had the time, and then he just played, but he actually played to it backwards. That's so cool. I love that.
Well, yeah, because that would have, I mean, they could have done it on a separate tape, but then you've got to sync it all up. It would make sense to just flip the tape over and go, well, here's the whole band. And they might, now, to be fair, when John recorded it, they might have muted some tracks for it to make sense. And if it's all in the same key, because all we're getting is the stabs, right? So we're not getting anything melodic. So it's really easy if you're just playing in the same key to play over that. But yeah, so they might have muted out some of the stuff, just kept the rhythm of it, so he knew where he was. But yeah, that's how they would have recorded it.
That's super cool. I love it.
Yeah, definitely would have been a very surreal. So I don't know if you've heard it yet, but when I did the Fault Line episode, I played it forwards and then I played it backwards. So we get both versions of it. I just reversed the whole song and went through it that way. And it's really fascinating to hear each of the musicians and what they played and gone, okay, this would have just been a crazy thing to do in the studio.
So, well, here's a question for you then. I don't know, with Deep Purple, were there drugs? Were there hallucinogens involved when they were kicking around? Or?
Okay, so I don't know much about Mark 1 as far as that goes. I suspect there may have been some intake of that. I don't think with Ian Pace. Ian Pace has been known to be just more of a drinker. Okay. John Lord has said that he partook in a thing or two over the course of years, so I don't know exactly what the points in time were. But when it came to Mark II, they were really more of a drinking band. It wasn't until Mark III when Glenn Hughes joined, and then Mark IV going into the Tommy Bolin era, where drugs really took a major role in what was going on in the band. There were songs that Glenn played on, and then he had to be taken to rehab and his parts were replaced. And it really became a whole thing. And that was really what led to the band breaking up in 76. So yes and no. Roger Glover was known as the stinking hippie because he had one joint. So that kind of tells you where Mark II was as far as that goes. But they were a heavy drinking band. In fact, they used to get a can of Coke and they'd pour out half of the Coke and pour in alcohol. And it was the working man's drink. And they would take that backstage because they could get away with it. And, everybody thought they were just drinking Coke. But yeah, that's really as far as they got into substances at least for Mark II anyway.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, Kevin, did you have any other questions that we haven't gotten to yet? I mean, I know you're coming back to do another show, but just anything that comes to mind while we're here?
Well, I think I'm two things I need to do is I need to go back and listen to Who Do We Think We Are? I need to listen to probably the first three albums again because I haven't listened to those albums in a million years. Mm-hmm. And I should go back because I have been waiting for In Rock. I've checked out a few episodes they need for certain songs. Mm-hmm. Like I had Corey on first and checked out the one I was telling you about before. Yeah. But I've got to get back in because I think, again, Deep Purple's one of those bands that I said, like, I generally would say if someone says, do you like Deep Purple? Yeah, I'm a fan. But I'm a fan of 5 specific albums, so I need to round that out, thinking just get back into that and just listen to more. So
yeah,
get over my hang-ups about Blackmore leaving.
Well, I will say that Mark I is a very different band from Mark II. I mean, Mark I was very developmental, and again, you're talking Richie and John in their early 20s. Ian Pace wasn't even 20 yet when he's joining Deep Purple, and it would have been roundabout at the time that he actually joined, but. I mean, these are young kids finding their sound, finding their way. And even though Richie was already a very accomplished musician and session player, working with Joe Meek and having played in bands before Roundabout, they're really trying to define their sound. They're dealing with a different era of music because, again, Zeppelin hadn't come along, Black Sabbath hadn't come along, they hadn't changed to rock yet. So they're more psychedelic, more classical, playing with some classical musicians, and it's really a different band. And then come Hallelujah, which was the demo from Ian and Roger that they played on. That's how they got in the band. And then you're like, okay, change is coming. And then they do the concerto, and then In Rock hits, and boom, it is a different world. And as we're recording this, actually, In Rock just dropped. So that is now available for people to listen to. And
awesome.
To give you a reference as to how far ahead I'm recording this, actually, but yeah, so it's yes, I like Deep Purple, but the eras of Deep Purple were very different until you get up to Mark II, and then it's just variations of musicians and how they affected the band.
That's cool too, right? I mean, I don't mind. I mean, talked about Van Halen already. There's lots of other bands that I think, AC/DC is another one. Obviously, when Bon Scott comes in, and then Malk's in, and they've had a couple of different drummers, and so I don't. That's well, not that it matters too much with AC/DC. It's not going to make too much of a difference on the sound. But I did have one other question then too, because in the Van Halen world, the big thing is the Brown sound, right? I mean, it's that early Van Halen guitar and drum sound between Alex and Neil. That's the Brown sound. Mm-hmm. I would say that Richie's tone on this song and this album, it's got a Brown sound quality to it. It just sounds like a guitar plugged straight into a tube amp, turned up so you get natural distortion and you get that warmth from the valves coming through the tone. So did Richie play through a bunch of... Did he have effects pedals? Or it's because it just sounds like a guitar into an amp, especially that solo in this song. Mm-hmm. It's got that tone where it just sounds like a mic'd amp. It doesn't sound like it's going through any effects units.
Yeah, I know that on stage he used an Echoplex. I don't know exactly when he introduced that, but I don't know what his setup was for this album. But it does seem, I would agree with you, it does seem very minimal. And it's funny because when I heard Eddie Van Halen say, "I've never used a distortion pedal," and I'm like, how is that possible? Because your sound is like, it's very clean, it's very distorted, and I would have never guessed the way he actually records. Richie was very experimental, so it wouldn't surprise me if he tried some different things over the years. Right. But obviously, when it came later, he's got like pedal setup now. But I honestly don't know for 1971.
Yeah, it just sounds cool, man. Like I said, I like that. I like the warmth of it. I like the just how natural it sounds, how present it sounds. You sound like in the room with the amp. You know what I mean? I just, like I said, that aesthetic for this type of music is one of the things that I love about this kind of music, is just the way it feels and the way it sounds. Of course, some of that's going to be nostalgia, of course, but and there's nothing wrong. Like, I like some modern sounds, but I tend to default to this.
Well, but think about too, thinking of that sound, the combination of the distorted organ, which you don't get in a lot of other bands, at least you weren't at the time, and then the heaviness of the guitar, but also Roger's bass is heavy.
Yes,
very, very heavy. And so the combination of those is giving such depth to these songs. And it's interesting because it really makes Richie's tone in the solo sound a lot thinner, because you don't have that organ and bass playing what he's playing.
Yeah.
And then you kind of realize...
It's why it stands out, though, right?
Yeah.
Again, you wouldn't do that, because then it wouldn't stand out. Then you know what I mean? It would just get lost in the mix a little bit, Well,
typically you would drive the solo even heavier, right? That would be the typical trend is, okay, if I'm going to be soloing, I've got to be even heavier. I've got to stand out. But he's actually more subdued sounding than he is really trying to push ahead of everyone. And that's when you've got a great engineer like Martin Birch. You're depending on him to get you to cut through all of the rest of it, because what we're getting in the background could easily drown him out.
Well, we didn't really talk all that much about that, really, because the production on this record too is absolutely just top notch. It sounds great. Mm-hmm. Like there's so much separation between all your frequencies. You can hear everything properly. No one's getting, because the worst thing on a rock record is the bottom end just gets muddy, and you can't really the bass and the bass drum and then the low end guitar, it just all sort of ends up getting swampy and soupy. Yeah, there's none of that on this record. It's crystal clear all the way through.
Yeah, and I have to say, I mean, Martin Birch being such a great engineer. There's a reason that they stuck with him for so long. There's a reason Richie stuck with him with Rainbow. The guy was just amazing. David Coverdale used him for Whitesnake. I did ask Graham Bonnet what it was like working with Martin Birch, and he says, just amazing. I mean, the guy is so comfortable and in control and knows what he's doing. And you don't worry about anything when you've got a guy like that. You can focus on your performance. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about, well, I better do this if I want to be heard, because he's going to make that happen. And I think that's the greatest thing for a musician, is to just be able to play naturally or sing naturally, because you know that the production is going to be taken care of and what you're doing is going to be a part of the song.
I was just looking, he did the first 5 Fleetwood Mac albums with Peter Green, obviously. Obviously, the Deep Purple, so Wishbone Ash, he did the first 3. He did Argus and Pilgrimage, and Rainbow, Whitesnake, Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult. He did everything up to Fear of the Dark for Iron Maiden.
Yeah.
He did Beck Ola. He did. Yeah. Wow.
Did he do Michael Schenker too? I can't remember.
Yes, 1982, Assault Attack.
Yeah, and that's another album that Graham Bonnet is on, and one of my favorite albums. Just an amazing album from top to bottom, and that's just good rock and roll for me.
Gary Moore, Faces, used to work with the guitarist. He knows how to record a guitarist, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. If you're working on rock music, and guitar is the most prominent instrument typically in most rock music, the riffs are written on guitar more so than keyboard. You have to know how to work around the guitar. You have to know how to blend in everyone else so that the guitar has its place, but so does everyone else. And I've never heard a record that Martin Birch was a part of that I would go, I don't like the sound of that. I might not like the album. I might not like the songs, but I've never heard one where I didn't like the sound. So I'll leave it
Amazing.
At that.
Love it.
Well, guys, in the show notes, we have links to all of Kevin's vast amount of podcasts. And you can also catch him on shows randomly like And the Podcast Will Rock. The only link I don't have would be Rock Court, because as I'm recording this, it's not out yet. If it becomes available and I remember, because, I am old, I'll try and sneak it in there as well. But Kevin, thank you so much. Check out the Tom Petty podcast. Check out the Ultimate Catalog Class. Check out, what's your other one? I can't think.
Seaside Pod Review.
Seaside Pod Review. Thank you. With his buddy Randy. I can't wait to do another episode with you, Kevin. It won't be as long because we've covered all your history now with Deep Purple. But I love the way that you look at songs. I love the way that you analyze them. And you could do it with, I understand how I'm feeling and I understand what I'm hearing. I love that you can separate those two things, because I think for critical reviews, that's really important.
Well, thanks, mate. I preciate that. It's practice, right? We talked about earlier.
Yeah.
You get better at it as you keep doing it, right? It's just one of those things you've got to put the hours in. But It's not work, right? It's just it's effort, but it's not work. We love doing this. And I love talking about music. I love talking about music with you. We've gone way over, as we always do, but it's been a hell of a lot of good fun.
You were definitely one of my favorite podcast buddies, and I always look forward to it. I think the next one that we'll probably be doing together will be the Season 5 wrap for Ultimate Catalog Clash, which will be very interesting. I'll just say this to close that out. The challenge I have with being sort of the final MC of that show, and the one that kind of handles the backstage of it, is that I know who wins typically very early on. I know who's going to pick for the next season, and I have to just shut up for weeks.
Well, by the time this comes out, we'll have 2 episodes left, I think, roughly, maybe around there. So it sounds, Corey's pretty confident that he hasn't won this season, but I don't know, man. He's pretty confident he's gone over, because he rated Pyromania a hell of a lot higher than I did. Mm-hmm. But we'll see. Because if I do choose, I've got a good idea, and then it's going to be a genre that we really haven't dipped our toes into yet. A lot of similarities with season 2 with Metallica. I'm not going to say too much more than that. There's some parallels with season 2.
So it's 1980s Debbie Gibson.
It's 3 albums.
Okay,
I'll say that much.
Well, I love too that you guys just don't go, here's my pick, this is what it's going to be. Like, you do this little, I'm going to give you choices. You're not going to know what they mean, but let's kind of just put some excitement in and randomize. Like, I'm going to be happy no matter what it ends up to be, because I wouldn't have picked all of these. But like the last one, I think that you had the choice of, like, when you had the Police on the table, I was like, oh, please God, let it be the Police. That's going to be so much fun. And then it didn't, like, the picks didn't turn out to be the Police. And I'm like, okay, but this is still good too. But it's like, I love that there's excitement even in the choice. It's not like my season pick is this, and that's what you're going to deal with. It's like, let's make that exciting too.
Well, I enjoy torturing Corey. That's what it all comes down to.
Don't we all? Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. We will be back with the next song as we start the bonus tracks for Fireball. We've got a few of those to go before we get to Machine Head, and appreciate all the support, all the likes and shares. Kevin, thank you so much. We will see you guys in the next one. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Deep Purple Smoke on the Podcast, a tour of the entire Deep Purple studio recordings. Please remember to give the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. Leave a comment and tell your friends. I also have a Patreon set up if you'd like to support the show. You can also write to me at smokeonthepodcast@gmail.com. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thanks for listening.